My name is Zara, and at 29, I never thought I'd be holding my own eviction notice in the house I secretly owned. My mother slammed it on my desk. Rents jumping from $1,500 to $3,500 unless I become my sister's free nanny. They thought they had me cornered. They forgot one tiny detail from 5 years ago. Whose credit score saved this house from foreclosure, and whose name is actually on the deed. Before I tell you how I made them regret everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The day my life turned into a battlefield started quiet. Deceptively, dangerously quiet. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I was sitting in my home office, staring at 3 monitors displaying the kind of financial crime that makes people's lives implode. I'm a forensic accountant, which is a fancy way of saying I'm the person companies call when money vanishes and they need to know who stole it and how. On this particular morning, I was tracking a $500,000 embezzlement scheme for a pharmaceutical client in downtown Atlanta, cross-referencing shell company transactions, following digital breadcrumbs through offshore accounts. This was the work that paid me 6 figures annually, work that required absolute concentration, silence, and respect for professional boundaries. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, the expensive kind that cost $400, trying desperately to drown out the chaos that had invaded my home 3 weeks earlier when my younger sister Ebony, her husband Kyle, and their twin toddlers moved back in. Since their arrival, silence had become a fantasy, a memory, something I mourned like a dead relative. The house had transformed from my sanctuary into their playground, and I was expected to just deal with it because family helps family, according to my mother's increasingly frequent lectures. I was milliseconds away from linking a fraudulent invoice to a personal bank account, the smoking gun that would crack my case wide open. When my office door didn't just open, it exploded inward, slamming against the wall with enough violence to rattle the framed diplomas I'd earned through years of sacrifice. My hand jerked on the mouse, nearly closing the file I'd spent 2 hours decoding, nearly destroying hours of meticulous work. I spun around in my chair, heart hammering, and there she was. My mother, Loretta, standing in my doorway like an avenging angel in a purple silk church robe, the one she reserved for moments when she wanted to feel like royalty, when she wanted to remind everyone in her orbit that she was the matriarch and we were merely subjects in her kingdom. Her hands were planted firmly on her hips, her expression a familiar cocktail of disappointment and irritation, the look she'd perfected over 29 years, the look reserved exclusively for me while my sister got soft smiles and endless patience. I pulled my headphones down, sighing with the weight of someone who'd had this conversation 1,000 times. "Mom, I'm working." The door was closed for a reason. "I'm in the middle of a forensic audit." She waved her hand dismissively, as if I just told her I was playing solitaire or scrolling Instagram instead of conducting a criminal investigation that could send someone to federal prison. "Working," she scoffed, her voice dripping with condescension. "You call sitting in your pajamas staring at a screen working? Your father's been up since 6 fixing the gutter. And Kyle is downstairs building his brand, that's work. You're just typing. Let me pause here and explain something that will make you want to throw your phone. I wasn't in pajamas. I was wearing professional attire because I had a video call scheduled in 10 minutes with clients who didn't care that I worked from home. They cared about results. But to my mother, if you weren't covered in dirt or wearing a uniform, you weren't really working. To her, my 6-figure salary, the salary that literally kept the lights on in this house, was somehow less legitimate than my father's pension and Kyle's non-existent streaming career. This is the cognitive dissonance that children of narcissistic parents live with. Your accomplishments are simultaneously invisible and expected, your contributions taken for granted while being openly mocked. "I have a meeting with a client in 10 minutes, Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "What do you need?" She marched over to my desk, her slippers shuffling against the hardwood floor I'd paid to refinish last year after water damage from a burst pipe my father had fixed, but actually made worse. She slapped a piece of lined notebook paper onto my keyboard, right on top of the spreadsheet that proved my client's CFO was buying Florida condos with embezzled company funds. "Read it," she commanded, crossing her arms like a drill sergeant. Picked up the paper. It was handwritten in my father's blocky, aggressive script, the kind of handwriting that looks like it's angry at the pen. "Notice of rent adjustment," it read. Previous rent, $1,500. New rent, $3,500. Due on the 1st. I stared at the number, $3,500, and felt reality tilt sideways. That wasn't just an increase, that was price gouging, that was extortion, that was more than the mortgage, utilities, and property taxes combined. Is this a joke? I asked, looking up at her, genuinely confused because surely this couldn't be real. You're more than doubling my rent. It's not a joke, Zara, my mother said, her voice rising with self-righteous indignation. It's economics. Your sister and her family are living here now. Costs are going up. The twins need organic milk. Kyle needs high-speed internet for his gaming streaming career. And you're the only one here without responsibilities. You're taking up the best room in this house for this little office of yours. It's only fair you contribute more. Let's break down what just happened, because this is textbook financial abuse disguised as fairness. I was already paying $1,500 monthly. Money that covered the entire mortgage payment with $300 left over for bills. My sister and her husband, they were paying nothing. Zero. Not a dime. They'd moved in rent-free, brought their chaos, their debt, their delusions of grandeur. And somehow I was the problem because I wasn't paying enough. This is the gaslighting that drives children of toxic parents insane. You're doing everything, paying for everything, holding everything together, and somehow you're still the selfish one, still the one not doing enough, still the one being lectured about fairness while subsidizing everyone else's existence. I stood up, feeling my professional composure cracking. Mom, I pay $1,500 a month. That covers the entire mortgage payment. Ebony and Kyle are paying nothing. Zero. And you want me to pay $3,500? That's market rate for a penthouse downtown. Ebony and Kyle are saving for their future, she shrieked, her voice echoing through my office like a siren. They're building something. Ebony's an influencer. She needs capital to curate her lifestyle content. Kyle's on the verge of a breakthrough with his Twitch channel. You have all this money sitting around because you don't have a husband or children to support. You're hoarding it, Zara. It's selfish. And there it was. The knife twist, the emotional manipulation disguised as concern. Because I was single, because I'd chosen career over marriage, because I didn't have children, my money wasn't really mine. It was a family resource to be redistributed according to my mother's whims. This is what happens when you're the successful child in a dysfunctional family. Your achievements become weapons used against you. Your stability becomes evidence of your selfishness. Your boundaries become proof of your cruelty. So here's the deal, my mother continued, leaning in like she was offering me a gift instead of an ultimatum. We're willing to keep the rent at $1,500, but you have to take over childcare for the twins. Ebony needs to focus. She can't create content with the boys running around screaming. And Kyle needs absolute silence during his streaming hours, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Since you're home all day anyway, just sitting here you can watch the boys. 8 in the morning until 6 at night. Feed them, change them, keep them quiet. You do that, and the rent stays the same. I looked at the clock on my screen. My client meeting was in 4 minutes. My mother was essentially telling me to quit my career, the career that kept a roof over everyone's heads, to become an unpaid servant for my sister who'd never worked a legitimate job in her life. I'm not a nanny, Mom, I said, my voice tight with suppressed rage. I have a job. A real job that requires my full attention. I can't watch 2 toddlers while I'm tracing laundered money. Then you pay, she spat back, her mask slipping to reveal the cruelty underneath. $3,500 or you get out. This is my house, these are my rules. If you don't like it, pack your bags and find somewhere else that'll tolerate your attitude. And that's when my father appeared in the doorway, holding a wrench like a prop, wearing that expression of passive-aggressive disappointment that had defined my childhood. Listen to your mother, Zara, he rumbled. We're doing you a favor letting you stay here. You're nearly 30. Most women your age are married. You're lucky we let you live under our roof. Don't be ungrateful. Ebony needs help, and family helps family. Family helps family. The phrase that had been weaponized against me for years, the phrase that meant I give everything and receive nothing, the phrase that meant my boundaries were selfishness and their demands were love. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out bank statements from 5 years ago and shove them in their faces. I wanted to remind them of the gambling debts, the foreclosure notices, the nights they sat crying at the kitchen table because the bank was coming for the keys. I wanted to scream that I was the one who saved them, that without me they'd be homeless, that this wasn't their house at all. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at my father, then at my mother, then at that handwritten ultimatum demanding more money than they'd ever earned in a single month, and I felt something shift inside me. A cold, crystalline clarity that comes right before you stop fighting and start winning. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was the desperate spinster daughter clinging to her childhood bedroom, grateful for scraps of tolerance. They had absolutely no idea that 5 years ago, when I saved this house, I'd prepared for exactly this moment. They'd forgotten whose name was on the deed. Not because they didn't know, but because acknowledging it would shatter their delusion of power. And that forgetting, that was about to cost them everything. "Okay," I said, my voice steady, flat, devoid of the emotion they expected. My mother blinked, clearly surprised by my sudden capitulation, confused by my lack of resistance. "Okay, what?" she asked suspiciously, narrowing her eyes like she was trying to detect a trap. "Okay, I'll think about it," I said, picking up the handwritten ultimatum and folding it with deliberate precision. "I need to finish my workday. I'll give you my answer tomorrow morning." My mother scoffed, snatching a pen from my desk cup and examining it like it was evidence of my frivolous spending. "You don't need to think about it, Zara. You don't have a choice. But fine, tomorrow morning. If you don't agree to the childcare arrangement, I expect a check for $3,500 on the 1st, or you can start packing boxes." She turned and swept out of the room, her purple robe billowing behind her like she was exiting a stage, like she'd just delivered the performance of her life. My father gave me one last stern look, pointed the wrench at me like a weapon, like a threat, and followed her out. I waited until their footsteps faded down the hallway. I waited until I heard Kyle's voice booming from the living room, shouting obscenities at a video game. I waited until the familiar sound of Ebony yelling at the twins to stop touching her ring light drifted up the stairs like toxic smoke. Then I locked my office door. Both the handle lock and the deadbolt I'd installed 3 months ago, the one my father had called an insult to family trust when he'd discovered it. I sat back down in my ergonomic chair, the one I'd paid $1,200 for because I spent 60 hours a week in it, and I put my noise-canceling headphones back on. But I didn't return to the embezzlement case immediately. No, this moment required something different, something I'd been building in secret for months. Preparation for a war I'd hoped would never come but knew was inevitable. I opened a different folder on my secure drive, a folder I'd labeled simply, Contingency. Inside was a document I'd scanned 5 years ago when I saved my parents from financial ruin, the deed to the house. I pulled it up on my screen and stared at the name on the legal paperwork, the name that held all the power they'd forgotten existed. The grantor was listed as Bernard and Loretta Williams. My parents. The grantee, the person who received ownership, was listed as Zara Williams. Just me. Not Zara Williams, tenant. Not Zara Williams, renter. Zara Williams, owner. Sole owner. Legal owner in the eyes of the state of Georgia and Bank of America. Let me take you back 5 years so you understand exactly how catastrophically my parents had miscalculated. I was 24 years old, fresh out of my master's program in forensic accounting, working 70-hour weeks at a junior position and living in a studio apartment that smelled like curry and disappointment. I was saving every penny, eating ramen, walking to work in worn-out shoes, building a nest egg because I understood something my parents never learned. Security is something you have to buy for yourself, safety is something you have to earn, and nobody is coming to save you. Then my mother called me at work one Tuesday afternoon, crying so hard I could barely understand her words. "Come home," she'd sobbed into the phone. "Please, Zara, we're losing everything." I'd rushed over, terrified that someone had died, that there'd been an accident, that something catastrophic and unavoidable had destroyed our family. What I found was worse than death. I found financial suicide disguised as bad luck. The kitchen table was covered in papers. Pink slips, final notices, collection letters, and right in the center like a tombstone, a foreclosure notice from the bank stamped in red ink. They had 30 days before eviction, 30 days before everything they'd built was auctioned off to strangers. How did this happen? I'd asked, my voice trembling as I looked at the mountain of debt. Dad, you have a pension. Mom, you work part-time. The mortgage should have been manageable. That's when the truth came out, leaking like poison from a cracked container. My father, the deacon, the pillar of the community, the man who'd lectured me about fiscal responsibility every time I bought coffee, had a gambling problem. Not a small problem. Not a few dollars on football Sundays problem. A catastrophic, life-destroying, family-annihilating gambling problem. He'd been betting on college football for years, starting small but escalating into a full-blown addiction. He'd taken out a second mortgage without telling my mother, leveraged the house for cash, drained his retirement accounts to pay bookies who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. By the time he confessed, sitting at that table with his head in his hands like a child caught stealing, he'd lost nearly $200,000. The equity my grandparents had helped them build. The savings account. Me. The financial security they'd bragged about at church. Complete fabrication. They were drowning, and instead of asking for a life preserver, they'd tied an anchor around their necks and smiled for the neighbors. We're going to be on the street, my mother had wailed, clutching a handkerchief like it could save her. The neighbors will see, the church will know. How can we show our faces at Sunday service if we're homeless? And there it was. Their biggest fear wasn't poverty, wasn't hunger, wasn't suffering. It was shame. It was the crack in the image of black excellence they'd curated so carefully for decades, the facade of success that meant more to them than actual financial stability. They looked at me with eyes wide and desperate, like children who'd broken something irreplaceable and needed an adult to fix it. You have good credit, Zara, my father had said, his voice barely a whisper. You have that fancy job. You could help us. I'd looked at the numbers with my accountant's brain, seeing patterns and trajectories that told me exactly what any financial advisor would say. Run. Let them fail. Let them learn. Let the consequences teach the lessons that words never could. But they were my parents, and 5 years ago I still believed that meant something. Still believed that blood created obligations that transcended logic. Still believed that saving them would earn me the love and respect I'd been chasing my entire life. So I made a deal with the devil, signed in ink and notarized by a woman who kept asking if I was sure. I used my perfect credit score. The score I'd protected like a sacred artifact, never missing a payment, never maxing out cards, never making the mistakes I'd watched my parents make, and I refinanced their debt. I paid off the arrears, cleared the foreclosure, negotiated with the bank, and put the house in my name because the bank wouldn't lend a single dollar to Bernard Williams, gambling addict and financial disaster. I remember the day we signed the papers at the title company. My father sat there, jaw clenched, signing where the notary indicated, handing over his kingdom to his daughter because he'd gambled it away on games he didn't even understand. It wounded his pride in a way that never healed, transformed whatever love he had for me into something bitter and resentful, turned me from daughter into permanent reminder of his failure. To preserve his ego, to protect his fragile sense of manhood, we made a verbal agreement, a secret pact that would eventually destroy us. To the world, to the neighbors, to the church congregation, the house was still theirs. I would move into my childhood bedroom, pay the mortgage directly from my account, but we'd call it rent, so my father could maintain the illusion of being the provider, the patriarch, the man in charge. You pay us rent, he'd said after the crisis passed, after the foreclosure notice was shredded, after his shame had time to ferment into anger. That way it looks right. You're contributing to the household, we're still the heads of the family. I'd agreed because I wanted them to have dignity, because I thought gratitude would follow eventually, because I was 24 years old and still naive enough to believe that doing the right thing would result in recognition, appreciation, and love. I was wrong. I was so devastatingly, expensively wrong. For 5 years I'd paid every cent. $2,000 monthly for the mortgage, $400 for property taxes, $200 for insurance. I'd transferred the money to a joint account, and from there it went to the bank automatically. But in their minds, in the story they told themselves and everyone else, the transaction had been rewritten. Over time, the truth eroded like a sandcastle at high tide. They stopped seeing it as me saving them and started seeing it as me living in their house. They forgot the foreclosure notice like it was a bad dream instead of a near-death experience. They forgot the gambling debts, the crying, the begging. They forgot that without my signature, without my credit, without my money, they'd be living in a one-bedroom apartment in the worst part of town if they were lucky. The lie we told the neighbors became the truth they told themselves. And now, 5 years later, they genuinely believed they were my landlords doing me a favor by letting me stay. They believed they had the power to raise my rent, to demand I become a servant, to threaten me with homelessness. They'd forgotten the most important detail. You can't evict the owner. You can't raise rent on the person who holds the deed. You can't threaten the landlord. I looked at that document on my screen, the transfer of deed, the legal proof of ownership, and I felt something shift inside me, something cold and final, like a door closing that would never open again. They wanted $3,500 a month. They wanted me to be a free nanny. They wanted to treat me like a squatter in my own house. Fine. We could play that game. But we were going to play by my rules now. And my rules were written in legal code, backed by state law, and enforced by sheriffs who didn't care about family dynamics or church reputations. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled to the name I'd hoped I'd never need. Marcus Chen, real estate attorney, the same lawyer who'd handled the refinancing 5 years ago, the man who knew exactly where all the bodies were buried because he'd helped me dig the graves. I typed a message. Marcus, it's time. I need eviction paperwork prepared. Hostile tenants, no lease agreement, owner-occupied property. How fast can you move? His response came back in 30 seconds. 48 hours for notice to vacate. I've been expecting this call for 3 years, Zara. Let's do it. I set the phone down and looked around my office. My office in my house that I'd paid for with my money, my credit, my sacrifice. They thought they'd cornered me, thought they'd finally put the uppity daughter in her place, thought they'd figured out how to extract maximum value from the family ATM. What they didn't realize was that the ATM had just closed its account, shut down its services, and called security. The eviction wasn't going to be emotional. It was going to be legal, cold, efficient, and absolutely final. I opened a new document and started typing a list. Utilities to disconnect, services to cancel, assets to remove. If they wanted to play landlord, they were about to learn that real landlords have power, and tenants who don't pay rent get removed. I smiled at my screen. Not a happy smile, but the smile of a forensic accountant who just found the smoking gun and was about to hand it to the FBI. They demanded I make a choice by tomorrow morning. Pay $3,500 or become a nanny. But I'd already made my choice, and they were going to hate it. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious or conflicted, but because I was working. Real work. The kind of meticulous, detail-oriented work that separates amateurs from professionals. The kind of work that builds airtight cases that can't be argued with or manipulated or guilt-tripped away. While my family slept downstairs, comfortable in their delusion of power, I sat at my desk with 3 monitors glowing in the darkness, building the foundation of their destruction one spreadsheet cell at a time. I started with the mortgage documents, pulling up every payment confirmation from the last 5 years. 60 months of transactions, every single one initiated from my personal account, every single one bearing my name as the payer. Then I pulled the property tax records, downloaded directly from the county website, showing Zara Williams as the taxpayer of record, the person legally responsible for the annual assessments that kept the government from seizing the property. Insurance came next. Homeowner's policy in my name, paid annually from my account, protecting a property that my parents believed they owned but couldn't insure because their credit was still destroyed from the gambling debts they'd never actually recovered from. But I didn't stop there because I'm a forensic accountant and we don't just build cases. We build monuments to truth that can't be knocked down. I went back further, pulling utility bills from the last 5 years. Electricity, water, gas, internet, trash collection. Every single one paid from my account through automatic withdrawals they'd never questioned because the lights stayed on and the water kept running and they never had to think about where money came from as long as it kept flowing. I created a master spreadsheet, color-coded and categorized, with tabs for housing costs, utilities, maintenance, repairs, and what I labeled family welfare. The grocery runs where I paid because someone forgot their wallet, the emergency car repairs for my father's truck, the medical co-pays when they couldn't afford their prescriptions, the cash I'd given Ebony for her endless parade of failed business ventures. Every transaction was documented with dates, amounts, and the excuse I'd been given. The grocery run on March 15th. Just this once, Zara, I'll pay you back Friday. The car repair on July 22nd. It's only $600, and your father needs his truck for work. The cash transfer to Ebony on October 3rd. She's so close to breaking through with her jewelry line. This $5,000 will change everything. None of it was ever paid back. Not $1. Not one apology. Not even one genuine thank you. By 3 in the morning, I had the full picture displayed across my screens like a financial crime scene. And the numbers were staggering. Total housing costs over 5 years. $144,000. Total utilities and services. $36,000. Total maintenance and repairs. Because God knows my father fixing things only made them worse. $22,000. Total cash transfers and emergency payments. $48,000. Grand total. $250,000. $250,000 I'd poured into this family over 5 years. And their response was to demand I pay more or become free labor. That number sat at the bottom of my spreadsheet in red, bold, 30-point font, and I stared at it until the sun started creeping through my office windows. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about dignity, about respect, about the fundamental human right to not be exploited by the people who claim to love you. At 7 in the morning, I heard movement downstairs. My mother's slippers shuffling across the kitchen floor, the sound of the coffee maker I'd bought gurgling to life, my father's morning cough that he refused to get checked because doctors cost money he claimed not to have. I saved all my documents to an encrypted cloud drive, backed them up to 3 different locations because I'd learned never to keep only one copy of evidence, and I closed my laptop. I stood up, stretched my back, and looked at myself in the mirror hanging on my office wall. I looked tired. There were circles under my eyes, and my skin had that gray pallor that comes from too many all-nighters and too much stress. But I also looked determined, focused, like a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument. I changed into professional clothes. Black slacks, a crisp white blouse, low heels, because this conversation deserved the armor of professionalism. I wasn't going down there as their daughter. I was going down there as their landlord. And landlords don't negotiate in pajamas. I walked down the stairs slowly, deliberately, my heels clicking on the hardwood with each step. My mother was at the kitchen table reading something on her phone, probably a church group chat where she played the role of wise matriarch, dispensing advice to people who had no idea she was financially dependent on the daughter she constantly criticized. My father was at the stove making eggs, humming off-key, completely at peace because he genuinely believed he'd won yesterday's confrontation, believed he'd successfully put me in my place. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. Coffee I'd bought, in a mug I'd purchased, with cream from the refrigerator I'd paid for. The mundane irony wasn't lost on me. "Good morning," I said, my voice neutral, pleasant even. My mother looked up, instantly suspicious of my calm demeanor. "Well," she said, setting down her phone with exaggerated care. "Someone's in a better mood this morning. I assume you've thought about our discussion yesterday and come to the right decision." "I have," I said, taking a sip of coffee and letting the silence hang there for a moment, watching them both turn to face me, watching their expressions shift from suspicion to anticipation to smugness. They thought I'd folded, thought I'd accepted their terms, thought the obedient daughter had returned after a brief rebellion. My father turned off the stove and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms with that particular brand of masculine satisfaction that comes from believing you've successfully dominated a situation. "Good," he said, nodding. "I knew you'd see reason, Zara. Sometimes you just need a night to think things through, to remember what's important. Family is important, and family takes care of each other." "You're absolutely right, Dad," I said, setting my coffee mug down on the counter with a soft click. "Family should take care of each other. That's why I've made my decision." My mother leaned forward, her hands clasped together like she was about to receive good news. So you'll watch the twins. Ebony will be so relieved. She's been so stressed trying to balance motherhood and her brand development. And the rent will stay at $1,500, so everyone wins. No, I said simply, quietly, watching that single syllable hit them like cold water. No, my father repeated, his voice rising slightly, confusion replacing his earlier satisfaction. What do you mean, no? Those were the terms. Childcare or $3,500. You have to pick one. I pick neither, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. Not their handwritten rent demand, but something else, something official. I'm not paying $3,500, I'm not providing free childcare, and actually, I'm not paying rent at all anymore. I unfolded the paper and placed it on the kitchen table between us. It was a copy of the property deed, the one with my name listed as the sole owner, the one that turned their entire power play into a legal joke. Because tenants pay rent to landlords, and I'm not the tenant, I'm the landlord. You are. The kitchen went silent except for the sound of the refrigerator humming, a sound that suddenly seemed deafening in the vacuum of their shock. My mother picked up the paper with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the document, reading the words that were dismantling her reality in real time. This is fake, she said, her voice shaking. This is some kind of trick. You forged this. Call the county clerk's office, I said, pulling out my phone and setting it on the table. The number's right there on the header. They're open at 8. Ask them who owns 422 Maple Drive. Ask them whose name is on the title. Ask them who pays the property taxes. I'll wait. My father snatched the paper from my mother's hands, reading it himself. His face cycling through confusion, denial, anger, and finally a sickly pale realization. This is from 5 years ago, he said, his voice barely a whisper. This is from when we refinanced. When I refinanced, I corrected. When you were facing foreclosure because you gambled away $200,000. When your credit was so destroyed that no bank would touch you. When I used my perfect credit score, my savings, and my future to save this house from auction. We refinanced it in my name because that was the only way to keep you from being homeless. You remember that, right, Dad? Or have you rewritten that part of history too? My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor with a screech. You said it was still our house, she shouted, her voice cracking. You said you were just helping us, that it was temporary, that we'd get it back in our names once things stabilized. I said a lot of things 5 years ago, I replied, keeping my voice level, refusing to match her hysteria. I said I'd help you. I said I'd pay the mortgage. I said we'd work together as a family. And I kept every single one of those promises. But you know what you said? You said you'd pay me back. You said you'd be grateful. You said this was a temporary arrangement until you got back on your feet. Instead, you spent 5 years treating me like a servant, demanding more money, stealing from me, and now threatening to evict me from my own property. My father set the deed down like it was contaminated, like touching it would infect him with the truth he'd been avoiding. So what now? He asked, and for the first time in my life I heard fear in his voice. Not anger, not disappointment, but actual fear. What are you saying, Zara? You're going to kick your own parents out onto the street. You're going to throw your sister and her babies into homelessness. That's who you are now. No, Dad, I said, picking up the deed and folding it carefully, methodically. I'm not going to kick you out. You're going to leave voluntarily, or you're going to be legally evicted. But that's your choice. What I am saying is that the free ride is over. The rent is no longer $1,500. It's now market rate, which in this neighborhood is $2,800 a month, plus utilities. And since you're now officially tenants, you'll need to sign a lease agreement, provide first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. That's $8,400 due by the first of the month, which is in 5 days. I let that number sink in, watching their faces process the impossibility of it. Or, I continued, you can vacate the premises within 30 days and we part ways peacefully. Those are your options. Pay market rent with a signed lease or move out. What you can't do anymore is live here for free while treating me like the help." My mother's face had gone from shock to red, rage replacing fear. "This is extortion," she hissed. "This is elder abuse. We'll sue you, we'll take you to court. We'll tell everyone what kind of monster you've become, how you're using money to control your own family." "Please do," I said, smiling for the first time that morning. "Please sue me. Please go to court where a judge will look at 5 years of mortgage payments, all made by me, where they'll see the deed with my name on it, where they'll discover you've been living rent-free in a property you don't own while demanding the owner pay you more money or provide free labor. Please, Mom, call your lawyer. I'd love to watch you explain to a judge how you're the victim in this scenario." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't shock, this was the sound of their entire worldview collapsing, the sound of power shifting so dramatically that they couldn't process it, couldn't fight it, couldn't manipulate their way out of it. My father sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. "You planned this," he said quietly, accusingly. "You've been planning this for years, haven't you? Waiting for the right moment to throw this in our faces." "No, Dad," I said, and for the first time that morning, I let real emotion creep into my voice. Not anger but sadness but exhaustion. I hoped I'd never have to have this conversation. I hoped that saving you would mean something, that sacrifice would be recognized, that contributing $250,000 over 5 years would buy me basic respect. I hoped that being a good daughter would eventually be enough. But yesterday, when you handed me that rent increase and demanded I become a free nanny, I realized something. It will never be enough. No matter how much I give, how much I sacrifice, how much I pay, you will always see me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved. So yes, I'm drawing the line. I'm establishing boundaries. I'm being the landlord you apparently forgot I was." I picked up my coffee mug and turned toward the stairs. "You have until end of day to give me your decision. Sign a lease and pay market rent or start packing. And just so we're clear, if you choose to fight this, I have 5 years of documentation, recordings of yesterday's conversation, and a lawyer who's been preparing for this moment since the day we signed that refinancing agreement. You won't win. You can't win. The only question is whether you leave with dignity or get dragged out by a sheriff." I walked up the stairs, my heels clicking with each step, and I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard my mother start to cry. Not soft, sad crying, but the angry, bitter crying of someone who just realized they'd lost a game they didn't know they were playing. I heard my father's voice, low and furious, saying something I couldn't quite make out. And I heard the sound of the kitchen chair being shoved back violently, hitting the wall. Let them rage. Let them cry. Let them finally understand what it feels like to have your security threatened by people who claim to love you. I had work to do. A real estate attorney to call, utility companies to notify, and a moving company to hire because whether they accepted it or not, the Williams family's free ride had just reached its final stop. And the landlord was done negotiating. The invasion had started 3 weeks before the rent ultimatum, on a rainy Saturday that should have been peaceful. I was sitting on the porch drinking coffee, enjoying the fact that the mortgage payment had cleared for the 58th consecutive month, when a moving truck that looked like it had survived a demolition derby pulled into the driveway. It backfired with a sound like a gunshot, making neighbors peek through their blinds, and sputtered to a halt, leaking oil onto the concrete I'd just power washed 2 days earlier. My sister Ebony stepped out of the passenger seat like she was disembarking from a private jet, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the overcast sky and a tracksuit that screamed Gucci but whispered flea market. Behind her, Kyle emerged from the driver's side, stretching his arms wide and taking a deep, dramatic breath of suburban air like he was a conquistador claiming new land for the crown. They didn't bring furniture. Not real furniture anyway. Not the kind of household essentials that signal people are actually prepared to live somewhere. What they brought were 20 cardboard boxes, each one meticulously labeled with black marker. Fragile, vintage couture archive, Italian leather goods, handle with care, designer accessories, do not stack. I watched from the porch as my father, a man with a bad back and 65 years on his bones, rushed out to help Kyle lift a box labeled, investment pieces, worth more than your car. Kyle, a man in his late 20s who claimed to be a fitness influencer, barely lifted a finger. He just stood there pointing, directing my father on the proper ergonomic technique to carry his wife's fake purses without scuffing them. "Careful, Bernard," Kyle said, his voice carrying that unearned confidence that always made my teeth grind. "That box is worth more than a Honda Civic." I took a sip of coffee and suppressed the urge to scream, because I knew for a fact that the contents of that box were worth about $40 from a street vendor in Manhattan's Canal Street. I'd seen the credit card statement where Ebony bought them, watched the charges roll in from luxury and designer. But my father treated those boxes like the Ark of the Covenant, grunting and straining, protecting Ebony's delusions like they were family heirlooms. My mother came bustling out of the house, clapping her hands with delight, rushing to hug Ebony like she was a returning war hero instead of a daughter who'd just been evicted from her luxury Buckhead apartment for non-payment of rent. "My babies are home," Mom cooed, ushering them inside with a kind of enthusiasm she'd never shown when I came home from college with honors. I stood and held the door open, feeling like a doorman in my own property, watching Ebony breeze past me without making eye contact, trailing a cloud of expensive perfume samples and denial. Kyle stopped, looked me up and down with an expression that somehow managed to be both condescending and dismissive, and gave me a nod that felt more like a pat on the head. "Hey Z," he said, using a nickname I'd never approved of, had never given him permission to use. "Good to see you. We're gonna need some help getting the recording equipment upstairs. It's heavy, professional-grade stuff." "I'm working, Kyle," I said, my voice flat, my face expressionless. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that made me want to throw my coffee in his face. "Right, the computer stuff," he said, making air quotes around computer stuff like my six-figure career was equivalent to playing solitaire. "Well, when you take a break from browsing the web, give us a hand. We're building an empire up there, Z. You could learn something about entrepreneurship." That was the beginning. The first shot across the bow in a war I didn't know I was fighting. The first 24 hours were a masterclass in displacement, in the systematic colonization of shared space by people who fundamentally don't understand boundaries. They didn't just move into the guest room. They annexed the entire house, turning common areas into their personal domains, transforming my sanctuary into their stage. Those 20 cardboard boxes of counterfeit luxury goods weren't unpacked and put away. They were staged, displayed, arranged throughout the house like art installations in a museum dedicated to fraud. Ebony stacked them in the hallway, in the living room corners, along the landing of the stairs, creating obstacles that turned every trip to the kitchen into an obstacle course. "It's an aesthetic choice," she explained when I asked her to move them, her voice dripping with the condescending patience of someone explaining color theory to a toddler. "Visual branding, Zara. When I film my Get Ready With Me videos, I need the background to scream luxury and abundance. I can't just hide them in a closet. That defeats the entire purpose of having designer pieces." So I said nothing. I just walked around the towers of fake wealth, navigating my own home like a guest, paying the electric bill that kept the lights on so she could film her elaborate lies for an audience of bots and desperate women who believed her lifestyle was real. But the boxes were nothing compared to Kyle. If Ebony was visual pollution, Kyle was a sonic weapon, an auditory assault that made sleep impossible and concentration a distant fantasy. He'd decided that his new persona was spiritual wellness guru and life coach, which apparently meant transforming the living room into his personal ashram, his temple of manufactured enlightenment. On the third day, I came downstairs at lunch to make a sandwich, needing fuel to get through an afternoon of data analysis. The living room blinds were drawn, plunging the house into artificial twilight. Scented candles that smelled like burnt patchouli were flickering on every surface, including the expensive mahogany coffee table I'd bought for my parents last Christmas, wax dripping onto the wood I'd paid $800 for. Kyle was in the center of the room, shirtless, wearing loose linen pants that looked like they'd been stolen from a yoga retreat, contorted into some elaborate pose on a mat that looked suspiciously like one of my good bath towels. He was humming, a low, vibrating chant that sounded like a dying refrigerator having an existential crisis. I walked toward the kitchen, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, trying to pass through quickly and quietly. "Essange!" The hiss cut through the air like a whip crack. I stopped and turned to look at him. Kyle had opened one eye, glaring at me with the intensity of a monk whose meditation had been interrupted by a screaming child. "Silence, please," he whispered, his tone severe, like he was a surgeon in an operating room and I'd just contaminated the sterile field. "I'm in deep alpha state. Your footsteps are disrupting my vibrational frequency. The energy in this house is already chaotic. I'm trying to realign the chakras of the entire property." I stared at him, genuinely speechless for a moment. I looked at the coffee table where a candle was dangerously close to a stack of magazines, a fire hazard waiting to happen. I looked at his pile of dirty laundry on the sofa, the socks and workout clothes he'd promised to take upstairs in a minute 3 days ago. "Kyle, this is the living room," I said, keeping my voice level through sheer force of will. "I live here. I'm walking to my kitchen to make lunch. That's not a disruption. That's called existing in my own home." "You're walking with heavy energy," he countered, untangling his limbs and sitting up to look at me with the patience of a guru explaining enlightenment to an unenlightened soul. "I'm channeling abundance for this family, Zara. I'm manifesting wealth opportunities, the kind of energy that brings millions. The least you can do is respect the process. You can use the back door if you need to move around, or take your shoes off and glide. Try to glide instead of stomping." I felt a vein in my forehead throb, felt my blood pressure spike in a way that probably took years off my life. "I'm not gliding in my own house, Kyle," I said, my voice tight. "And if you burn a hole in that table with your candles, you're buying a new one. Not asking me for money to replace it, actually purchasing it with your own funds." He scoffed, closing his eyes again and resuming his humming, dismissing me like I was a servant who'd overstepped. "Materialism," he said, shaking his head sadly. "That's your problem, Z. You're too attached to things, to possessions, to the physical world. You need to let go, release your grip on material wealth, and embrace the spiritual abundance that's trying to flow into your life." I walked into the kitchen, making sure to step as heavily as possible, my heels hitting the hardwood like hammers, a petty act of rebellion that gave me more satisfaction than it should have. "Let go," he'd said. That was rich coming from a man whose wife had 20 boxes of fake designer bags blocking the hallways, whose entire existence was predicated on the appearance of material wealth he didn't actually possess. That night was the first official family dinner since their return, and it became the template for every meal that followed, a performance of disrespect disguised as family bonding. Usually I cooked, not because I enjoyed it particularly, but because my mother's cooking involved boiling vegetables until they were gray mush and my father thought seasoning meant salt and more salt, so I'd taken over kitchen duties to ensure we all avoided scurvy and hypertension. I'd spent 3 hours making gumbo that afternoon, a recipe I'd perfected over years, rich with spices and seafood and sausage, a nod to our Louisiana heritage that usually put everyone in a good food coma. I'd spent an hour just on the roux, stirring it constantly until it was the color of dark chocolate, adding ingredients with the precision of a chemist. We sat down at the dining table, Ebony on her phone filming the food but not eating it, adjusting angles and lighting for Instagram, moving her plate around like she was a food photographer instead of someone about to eat dinner. "Finally, we're eating," Kyle announced, sitting down at the head of the table, a seat my father usually occupied, but Bernard just moved to the side without protest, letting this man take his place like it was the natural order of things. Kyle took a spoonful of the gumbo, chewing slowly with his eyes closed. His face contorted in deep thought like a judge on a cooking competition show. He swallowed, took a sip of water, and sighed dramatically. "It's okay," he said, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent room, carrying the weight of a verdict. I paused, my spoon halfway to my mouth, unable to process what I'd just heard. "Okay," I repeated. "Yeah, it's edible," he continued, gesturing vaguely with his spoon like he was conducting an orchestra. "But it lacks complexity, depth, sophistication. When we were in Los Angeles, before we decided to relocate for strategic reasons, we had this private chef, Marco. He made a seafood stew that would make you weep actual tears of joy. He imported his saffron from Spain, massaged the shrimp before cooking them to release their natural sweetness. This," he waved at my gumbo dismissively, "this is a little heavy, a little pedestrian, a little basic." My mother nodded eagerly, Like Kyle was delivering a sermon from the mount instead of insulting the meal I'd spent hours preparing. "Oh, I know what you mean, Kyle," she said, her voice syrupy with agreement. "You have such a refined palate, such sophisticated taste. We're just used to simple country cooking here. Zara does her best, but she's not a professional chef, not like the people you're accustomed to." I looked at my mother, looked at the woman who'd taught me to boil broccoli until it disintegrated, who thought seasoning was dangerous, who'd never made a roux in her life, and I felt something inside me crack. "I'm not a chef, Mom," I said, my voice tight with suppressed rage. "But I am the one who bought the groceries. The shrimp alone cost $40. Price doesn't equal quality, Zara," Kyle interrupted, shaking his head with sad wisdom. "It's about the soul you put into it, the energy, the intention. This tastes like stress. It tastes like negative energy and resentment. I think my body is actually rejecting the vibrations of this meal. I might need to make myself a protein shake later to cleanse my system." Ebony finally looked up from her phone, adding her verdict. "Babe, you're so right. It is a little salty. Zara, did you use the cheap salt? We only use Himalayan pink salt in our meals. It's better for your aura and your cellular health." I put my spoon down, the sound of metal hitting china abnormally loud in the quiet room. The disrespect was palpable. It was a physical weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. They were eating food I'd paid for, in a house I'd paid for, and treating me like hired help who'd failed to meet their standards, like a servant who needed to be scolded into improving. "If you don't like it," I said, pushing my chair back and standing up, my voice deadly calm, "you're welcome to cook for yourselves tomorrow. In fact, I insist. I would love to taste this high-vibrational food you're so accustomed to, this spiritually enlightened cuisine that apparently requires private chefs and imported ingredients." Kyle laughed, a condescending, dismissive sound that made my hands clench into fists. "We'd love to, Z, we really would," he said, spreading his hands like he was being reasonable. "But our schedule is packed. Creating content is a full-time job. Building a brand requires constant attention. We don't have 3 hours to stand over a stove stirring flour. That's why it's good you're here, why it works out perfectly. You have the time, you have the skills, and we have the vision. It's symbiotic." "I have a job, Kyle," I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to control it. "A real job with real clients who pay real money." He waved his hand dismissively, like he was swatting away a fly. "The computer thing, right? That's different, that's flexible, that's just you and a screen. You can do that anytime. But meals, they have to happen at specific times, and someone has to make them. That's just reality, Z. That's just how households function." Before I could respond, my father spoke up, clearing his throat with that particular sound that meant he was about to deliver a pronouncement, a judgment from on high. "Zara, sit down," he commanded, his voice stern, brooking no argument. I looked at him, but I didn't sit. I stood there, my hands on the back of my chair, waiting. "Your attitude is becoming a problem," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Kyle and Ebony are going through a transition. They're used to a certain lifestyle, a lifestyle they earned through hard work and success. They're trying to adjust to being back here, and you're making it difficult with your defensiveness, your hostility, your refusal to be a team player." I wanted to scream that they were broke, that they'd been evicted, that their lifestyle was built on credit cards and illusion, but my father continued before I could speak. "In fact, we need to make some changes to accommodate them properly," he said, and I felt my stomach drop because I knew what was coming, could see the trap being constructed in real time. "The house is too cluttered with your things. Ebony needs space for her studio. Kyle needs a quiet area for his meditation and his streaming. Your mother and I have discussed it, and starting tomorrow, you need to clear out your belongings from the living room, the dining room, and the garage. Your books, your exercise equipment, those boxes of files you keep for work. It's taking up too much space. You can rent a storage unit down the street. There's one that's climate-controlled, perfect for your things." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "You want me to move my belongings out of my own house so Kyle can have a meditation space?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's not your house, Zara," he snapped, his patience evaporating. "It's our house, and right now the priority is Ebony and Kyle. They're the future of this family, they're building something important. You're just existing, just taking up space that could be used for their success, their growth, their brand development. Ebony smirked, taking a small bite of the gumbo she'd just criticized. Thanks, Daddy, she said sweetly. We really appreciate the support. We just need good lighting and positive vibes. Zara's stuff is so corporate, so sterile. It ruins the aesthetic we're trying to create. Kyle nodded in agreement, pointing his fork at me like it was a weapon. Her clutter is blocking the flow of money into this house, he said seriously. Feng Shui isn't a joke, Z. Energy can't circulate around obstacles. Your things are literally preventing our financial breakthrough. I looked at them, all four of them, my parents beaming at the golden couple, Ebony and Kyle radiating entitlement like it was a superpower. They truly believed their own hype, truly believed that I was the obstacle, the dead weight, the servant who should be grateful to exist in their presence. Fine, I said quietly. And they all looked surprised because they'd expected a fight, expected tears, expected me to beg. I picked up my bowl, walked to the sink, and dumped the rest of the gumbo down the disposal. The grinding sound filled the kitchen as it chewed up the shrimp and sausage and 3 hours of my labor. What are you doing? My mother shrieked, jumping up from the table. That's perfectly good food, that's wasteful. It had bad vibrations, I said, turning to face them, my voice ice cold. I wouldn't want to poison your auras with my negative energy. I'll clear my things out. Don't worry, you'll have all the space you need for your empire building and your chakra alignment and your content creation. All the space in the world. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them sitting in stunned silence, and marched up the stairs past the fake designer boxes, past the bathroom where the twins had flooded the floor with bathwater. I went into my office and locked the door, both locks, the handle and the deadbolt. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from cold, hard rage. The kind of rage that doesn't explode but calcifies, turning into something permanent and unforgiving. They wanted space. They wanted me to disappear, to minimize myself, to become invisible except when they needed my money or my labor. They had no idea what they just started, no concept of the consequences that were about to rain down on them. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the spreadsheet I'd started, adding a new tab labeled Storage and Relocation Fees. If they wanted me to move my things to make room for their fantasy life, I would. But I wasn't going to pay for a regular storage unit. I opened my browser and searched for the most expensive climate-controlled white glove storage facility in Atlanta, the kind that stored art collections and antique cars, the kind that cost more per month than most people's rent. I booked a unit and put it on the credit card linked to the household expenses account, the account my father thought he controlled but which was actually funded entirely by my automatic transfers. You want space, Dad? I whispered to the empty room, looking at the confirmation email. You got it. Let's see how much space costs when you're actually paying for it. I leaned back in my chair, listening to Kyle's voice downstairs complaining that he was still hungry, listening to my mother offering to make him a sandwich with a voice full of apology and concern. I put my headphones on and turned up the volume, drowning them out. Let them eat sandwiches. Let them play house. Let them believe they'd won. Because tomorrow, the real game was going to begin. And unlike Kyle's imaginary empire, my moves were going to be very, very real, backed by legal documents they'd forgotten existed and financial power they'd consistently underestimated. The landlord had just been disrespected for the last time. And eviction notices don't care about family dinners or spiritual vibrations or content creation schedules. The violation happened on a Thursday morning while I was on a conference call with a client in Munich, walking them through a forensic analysis of their subsidiaries' accounting irregularities. I had my office door locked, both locks engaged, the rubber doorstop wedged underneath for extra security, and my noise-canceling headphones on, speaking in the professional, measured tone that reassured clients they'd hired the right person to find their missing millions. I was explaining the difference between creative accounting and actual fraud when I heard it. A sharp crack, the sound of wood splintering, followed by the metallic clatter of hardware hitting the floor. My locked door, swung open violently, and there stood Kyle holding a screwdriver, breathing hard, looking triumphant like he'd just conquered Everest instead of breaking into a private workspace. Behind him stood Ebony holding both twins, the boys squirming in her arms, their faces smeared with something that looked disturbingly organic. "Sorry, gotta go, emergency," I said into my headset, muting the call and ripping off my headphones. "What the hell, Kyle? You just broke my lock." "Relax, Z," he said, walking into my office like he owned it, looking around with the air of someone conducting an inspection. "Your Wi-Fi signal is strongest in here, and I need to upload a video before the algorithm buries it. My room has like 2 bars, it's unacceptable. I need this space for the next hour, maybe 2. "Get out," I said, standing up from my desk, my hands shaking with rage. "Get out right now, Kyle. This is my office, this is my workspace. You can't just break in here." Ebony pushed past him, the twins starting to cry in that building crescendo that signals an impending meltdown. "Zara, don't be dramatic," she said, looking around for a place to set the children down. "I have a nail appointment in 20 minutes, and Kyle said he'd watch them, but now he's busy, so you need to take them. It's just an hour. They're fed, they're changed. Just keep them from destroying anything." "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "Absolutely not. I'm on a work call with international clients. I can't watch children right now. You need to leave, both of you, immediately." Kyle laughed, that infuriating dismissive sound that made my blood pressure spike. "International clients," he mocked, making air quotes. "It's a Zoom call, Z, you're not performing surgery. Just pause it, watch the kids, and stop acting like your computer job is life or death." Before I could respond, Ebony set both twins on the floor of my office, and they immediately scattered like feral animals released into the wild. One made a beeline for my desk, reaching up with sticky hands toward my keyboard. The other found my bookshelf and started pulling volumes off the shelf, expensive reference books on tax law and financial regulation that cost hundreds of dollars each, throwing them on the floor with gleeful abandon. "Ebony, pick them up," I said, my voice rising. "Pick them up right now and get them out of my office." "God, you're so uptight," she said, checking her phone, her nails clicking against the screen. "They're just exploring, that's how children learn. You'd know that if you had any maternal instinct, but I guess career women don't understand child development." She turned and walked out, Kyle following her, and before I could stop them, they closed the broken door behind them, trapping me in my office with 2 toddlers who were now actively destroying my professional space. I lunged for the twin at my desk, pulling him away from my keyboard just as his sticky fingers made contact with the keys. I looked at my hands. They were covered in something brown and viscous. "Please be chocolate," I thought desperately. "Please be chocolate and not what I think it is." The other twin had moved from the bookshelf to my filing cabinet, pulling open drawers and grabbing folders, scattering documents across the floor like confetti. "No, no, no," I said, trying to gather the files while simultaneously keeping the first twin from climbing onto my chair. "Please just stop touching things." I looked at my computer screen. The muted conference call was still active, and I could see the client's face, confused and concerned, probably wondering where I'd gone and whether this company had hired a professional or an amateur. I unmuted for half a second. "Family emergency. I'll call you back in 10 minutes, I said, then muted again before the sounds of toddler chaos could transmit. That's when I saw it. My jar of La Mer moisturizing cream. The expensive stuff that costs $325 and lasts me 6 months, sitting on the corner of my desk where I'd left it after my morning routine. The twin who'd been after my keyboard had found it, had somehow managed to unscrew the lid with his tiny, surprisingly dexterous fingers, and was now scooping out handfuls of the thick white cream and smearing it across his face, his hair, his clothes. "No!" I screamed, diving for the jar, but it was too late. He'd already destroyed half the container, and what he hadn't smeared on himself, he'd dropped onto my Persian rug. The antique rug I'd bought at an estate sale for $1,200, the rug that was now stained with luxury face cream that would never ever come out. The other twin, seeing his brother having fun, toddled over and stuck his hands in the jar too, and within seconds both children were covered in my skincare, laughing hysterically, thinking this was the best game ever invented. I stood there, paralyzed by rage and disbelief, watching $300 of moisturizer being used as finger paint by children whose parents had just broken into my office and left them here like I was a free daycare service. The door opened again. My mother walked in, saw the scene, and instead of apologizing or helping, she laughed. "Oh my goodness," she said, pulling out her phone to take pictures. "Ebony, come see this. The boys found Zara's fancy face cream. This is adorable. This is Instagram-worthy." Ebony appeared in the doorway, saw her children covered in my expensive skincare, and started filming. "Oh my God, this is perfect," she squealed. "This is authentic mom content. When your babies find mommy's expensive products. This is going to get so many likes." "It's not your expensive product," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It's mine. It's my face cream that your children just destroyed because you broke into my locked office and abandoned them here." My mother chuckled, shaking her head like I was being ridiculous. "Boys will be boys, Zara," she said dismissively. "You really shouldn't leave things like that within reach. It's a choking hazard. You need to be more careful if you're going to be watching them, more responsible about what you keep in accessible locations." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt a switch flip somewhere in the back of my brain. The same switch that flips when I find the smoking gun in a fraud case, the switch that turns off emotion and turns on cold, calculated documentation. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. "What are you doing?" Ebony asked, her smile fading as she watched me. "Documenting the damage," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, flat and professional. I took a photo of the empty jar, zooming in on the price tag still visible on the bottom. $325. I took a photo of the ruined rug, capturing the grease stains that would never come out, the permanent damage to an antique textile. I took a photo of the twins covered in my cream, their sticky handprints all over my desk, my chair, my walls. I took a photo of the broken door lock, the splintered wood, the screws on the floor. "Zara, lighten up," my mother said, her smile disappearing entirely as she realized I wasn't joking. "It's just cream, it washes off. The boys didn't mean any harm." "It doesn't wash off the rug, Mom," I said, continuing to photograph everything, narrating for the video I was now recording. "And it doesn't wash off the fact that Kyle broke into my locked office, destroyed my door, and you allowed your grandchildren to vandalize my workspace while I was on a professional call with international clients." "You're acting crazy," Ebony said, backing away from me, clutching her phone like a shield. "You're acting like a psycho cop or something. Stop filming my kids. That's weird, it's invasive." "I'm filming my crime scene," I said, stopping the recording and immediately backing the file up to 3 different cloud servers. "This is evidence of breaking and entering, destruction of property, and unauthorized childcare duties forced upon me during billable work hours." I looked at my mother, and she looked uneasy for the first time, her usual authority wavering in the face of my cold detachment. "Clean this up," she ordered, trying to regain control, pointing at the mess. "Clean up the boys, then scrub that rug. You have a mess to fix, young lady." "No," I said simply, walking toward the door, stepping around them. "You clean it up. Or don't. It doesn't matter to me anymore because this rug, this cream, this office, and this house are all mine, and I'm done pretending otherwise." I walked past the tower of fake designer boxes in the hallway, went downstairs to the kitchen, and grabbed a bottle of wine. Expensive wine that I'd been saving, wine that cost more than their weekly grocery budget. I walked out to the back porch and sat down, opening my laptop that I'd thankfully brought with me earlier that morning when I'd sensed something was coming. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard, and I took a sip of wine straight from the bottle because I was past caring about appearances or propriety. I opened my spreadsheet, the one I'd been building, the comprehensive documentation of every financial crime this family had committed against me. I added new line items. Date, today. Item, professional La Mer cream, stolen and destroyed. Value, $325. Date today. Item, antique Persian rug, damaged beyond repair. Value $1,200 for replacement. Date today. Item, door lock and frame destroyed. Value $200 for locksmith and repair. Date today. Item, lost billable hours due to forced childcare, conference call interrupted, client relationship damaged. Value. Estimated $1,500 in lost revenue and another $1,000 in potential contract penalties. I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet where the running total lived. That number that grew larger every day. That number that represented the true cost of family loyalty. The total had just jumped by over $4,000 in a single morning. My mother appeared at the back door, staring at me through the glass. She looked angry, but she didn't come outside. She knew on some instinctive level that she'd pushed too far this time, that something fundamental had shifted. She just didn't know how far. She thought this was just a fight. Thought we'd yell and scream and then I'd clean the rug and buy more cream and everything would go back to normal. Back to me funding their delusions and absorbing their disrespect. She didn't understand that I wasn't just counting the cost of the cream. I was counting the cost of my dignity, my peace, my entire existence, and I was preparing an invoice that would bankrupt them emotionally, financially, and relationally. I took another sip of wine and checked my phone. A notification from the bank. My scheduled mortgage transfer had been cancelled successfully, just as I'd programmed it to. Next month, for the first time in 60 months, the money wouldn't magically appear in the account. The mortgage payment would bounce, the bank would send notices, and those notices would go to the owner of record, me. Let them keep the cream. Let them keep the rug. Let them enjoy every last drop of luxury they could squeeze out of their remaining days in this house, because those days were numbered now, counted down like a bomb timer, and when the explosion came, they wouldn't even see it coming. I opened a new tab on my laptop and searched for Best Eviction Attorneys Atlanta, How to Remove Family Members from Your Property, and Tenant Rights When No Lease Exists. The search results were educational, enlightening, and deeply satisfying. In Georgia, when there's no lease agreement and no rent payments being made, occupants are considered tenants at sufferance, which is legal terminology for squatters. And squatters have almost no rights. They can be removed with a simple notice to vacate, usually 30 days, and if they refuse, a sheriff can physically remove them and their belongings. No court battle. No long legal process. Just a notice, a deadline, and a man with a badge. I bookmarked several law firm websites, made notes of phone numbers, and started drafting an email to Marcus Chen with the subject line: Acceleration of timeline. Need eviction papers immediately. I attached photos from today's incident. Attached screenshots of my bank statement showing 5 years of mortgage payments. Attached the deed with my name highlighted in yellow. Marcus, I typed. They just broke into my office, destroyed my property, and forced me to babysit during a client call. I'm done being patient. I'm done being understanding. How fast can we move? Can we go from 30 days notice to immediate eviction if I can prove ongoing property damage and interference with business operations? I hit send and closed the laptop. The sun had fully set now, and the porch lights, the lights I paid the electric bill to power, clicked on automatically. From inside the house, I could hear Kyle's voice complaining loudly that the Wi-Fi was slow, that he couldn't upload his video, that someone needed to fix the internet immediately. The internet's fine, Kyle, I whispered to the darkness, smiling for the first time that day. What's not fine is your understanding of who pays for it, who owns it, and how quickly it can disappear. My phone buzzed. Marcus responding already, even though it was after business hours, because good lawyers know when a client is ready to go nuclear. Can do 15 days if you file for emergency possession based on business interference and property destruction. Judge Hendricks loves property owners who've been taken advantage of by family. Bring all documentation to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. We're going to war, Zara, and we're going to win. I looked at the house. My house, with its lights blazing, its televisions playing, its occupants consuming resources they didn't pay for while actively destroying the hand that fed them. 15 days. 2 weeks. In 15 days, they'd be standing on the curb with their fake designer boxes, looking at a locked door they could no longer enter, finally understanding that the computer job they'd mocked was the only thing standing between them and homelessness. And that job had just documented everything, backed up the evidence, and hired the best eviction attorney in Atlanta. The cream was gone. The rug was ruined. But I just bought something far more valuable. I'd bought proof, leverage, and the legal ammunition to end this nightmare once and for all. The meeting with Marcus Chen happened at exactly 9 a.m. in his downtown office. a sleek space on the 32nd floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Marcus was waiting for me with 2 associates, a paralegal, and enough legal pads to write a novel. He stood when I entered, and I could see in his eyes that he'd been preparing for this moment for 5 years. Ever since the day we'd closed on that refinancing, and he'd quietly told me to keep every receipt, every email, every piece of documentation because family situations have a way of going south. "Zara," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I've reviewed everything you sent last night. I've also pulled the property records, the mortgage history, and the tax assessments. Before we talk strategy, I need to ask you one question. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Because once we file these papers, once we serve notice, there's no going back. Your relationship with your family will be permanently altered." I set my bag down on his conference table and pulled out a folder. A thick folder containing printed bank statements, photographs of the damage, screenshots of text messages, and a flash drive with video evidence. "Marcus," I said, looking him directly in the eye, "my relationship with my family was permanently altered the moment they forgot I was a person and decided I was an ATM machine. I'm certain. Let's end this." He nodded once, then smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of a lawyer who'd just been given permission to destroy someone who deserved it. "Then let's talk about what we're going to do, and let me be clear. It's going to be fast, it's going to be thorough, and it's going to be absolutely devastating to them." He opened a leather portfolio and pulled out a document that looked like it had been drafted by someone who genuinely enjoyed inflicting legal pain. "This is a notice to quit," he explained, sliding it across the table. "In Georgia, when you have residents without a lease agreement who aren't paying rent, you can file for immediate eviction under what's called a dispossessory action. Normally we'd give them 30 days as a courtesy, but given the evidence you've provided, the breaking and entering, the property destruction, the interference with your business operations, we can petition the court for an expedited hearing. I have a relationship with Judge Patricia Hendricks, and she does not tolerate people who take advantage of property owners, especially family members who exploit generosity." I picked up the document and read through it, my forensic accountant brain appreciating the precision of the language. "You are hereby notified that you are unlawfully occupying the property located at 422 Maple Drive. You have no lease agreement, you have made no rent payments, and you have caused significant damage to the premises. You are required to vacate within 15 days of service of this notice. Failure to vacate will result in forcible removal by law enforcement." 15 days, I said, feeling the weight of those words. "That's faster than I expected." "It gets better," Marcus said, pulling out another document. "This is a restraining order petition. We're going to file this simultaneously. It prohibits them from entering your office, from taking any of your property, from interfering with your work, and from harassing you in any way. If they violate it, they go to jail. Not civil court, actual jail with handcuffs and booking photos." One of the associates, a young woman named Jennifer, spoke up. "We're also recommending you file a police report for the breaking and entering. Even though it's family, it's still a crime. The police report creates an official record that strengthens your eviction case and protects you if they try to retaliate or claim you're the aggressor." I thought about my father's face when a police officer showed up at the door, thought about my mother's horror when the neighbors saw squad cars in the driveway, and I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no hesitation, no familial obligation to protect their reputation. "File it," I said. "File everything. I want this ironclad. I want it impossible for them to fight, impossible for them to claim victim status, impossible for them to manipulate their way out of consequences." Marcus leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "There's one more thing we need to discuss, Zara, and it's going to feel aggressive, but I strongly recommend it. We need to cut off all utilities immediately. The electric, the water, the gas, the internet. Everything that's in your name and funded by your accounts. The moment we serve the eviction notice, we terminate services. Isn't that illegal?" I asked, even though part of me desperately wanted to do exactly that. Isn't there something about landlords not being able to force tenants out by making the property uninhabitable? "Normally yes," Marcus said. And I could see he'd been hoping I'd ask this question. But those protections apply to legal tenants with lease agreements who are paying rent. Your family members are neither. They're classified as licensees or guests whose permission to occupy has been revoked. You have every legal right to discontinue services that you're paying for, especially when they're actively costing you money and damaging your property. It's not making the property uninhabitable. It's simply stopping your personal financial support of people who are no longer welcome, Jennifer added. Think of it this way. If a friend was staying at your house and you asked them to leave, would you be required to keep paying their electric bill? Course not. This is the same situation, just with more complicated emotional dynamics that don't change the legal reality. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, looking at the utility accounts linked to my name, the accounts that had been draining my money for 5 years to keep people comfortable who showed me nothing but contempt. Electric bill, $180 monthly, inflated by Kyle's 24-hour streaming setup and my mother's insistence on running space heaters in every room. Water bill, $90 monthly, elevated by Ebony's hour-long showers and the twins' constant bath time that flooded the bathroom. Internet bill, $150 monthly for the gigabit fiber connection that Kyle claimed he needed for his career, but that I needed for actual work. Do it, I said, navigating to each account and selecting the cancellation option. Schedule termination for the day after we serve the eviction notice. I want them to have 1 day to read the paperwork, 1 day to understand what's happening, and then I want them to sit in the dark and really contemplate their choices. Marcus actually laughed. A genuine sound of appreciation. You're vindictive, he said, and it sounded like a compliment. I like that in a client. It means you won't get soft halfway through and try to settle. People who get soft are the ones who end up getting taken advantage of twice. We spent the next 2 hours going through every detail of the case, building a timeline of exploitation that read like a true crime documentary. The associates took notes while I walked them through 5 years of financial abuse. The gambling debts I'd paid off, the mortgage I'd refinanced, the constant cash requests that were never repaid, the stolen credit card and the Gucci bag, the destroyed office and the ruined skincare products. By the time we finished, Jennifer looked genuinely angry on my behalf. This is one of the worst cases of family exploitation I've ever seen, she said, reviewing her notes. And I've seen adult children steal their parents' retirement funds. What your family did to you, taking advantage of your success, your generosity, your love, it's unconscionable. It's also very well documented, Marcus said with satisfaction, which means it's going to be a very short court case. Judge Hendricks is going to take one look at this evidence and issue the eviction order immediately. I'd be shocked if the hearing lasts more than 15 minutes. I signed the documents they'd prepared. The eviction notice, the restraining order petition, the property damage claim, the police report. My signature felt powerful, final, like I was signing a declaration of independence from people who'd treated me like a colony to be exploited. When do we serve them? I asked, watching Marcus gather the papers into a neat stack. Today, he said, checking his watch. I'm sending a process server to the house at 2 p.m. He's going to hand-deliver these documents to your father. Legally, we only need to serve one adult occupant, and serving the self-proclaimed man of the house feels appropriately poetic. He'll be required to sign acknowledging receipt, and from that moment, the 15-day countdown begins. What should I do? I asked, suddenly realizing I'd have to go back to that house, have to face them after this bomb was dropped. Should I be there? Should I leave? What's the protocol? Marcus shook his head firmly. You should not be there. In fact, I'm going to insist you're not there. Go to a hotel, go to a friend's house, go sit in a coffee shop, but do not be present when they're served. People react unpredictably when they realize they're losing everything, and I don't want you in the blast radius. Let them have their meltdown without an audience, without someone to blame who's standing right in front of them. Jennifer pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. This is the number for a client services specialist at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, she said, handing it to me. Tell them you're a client of Marcus Chen's firm and you need a room for the next few days while a property dispute is resolved. They'll take care of you, security, privacy, everything. Bill it to the firm. We'll add it to the case expenses that your family will eventually owe you." I took the card, feeling the weight of what was happening. In less than 5 hours, my family would receive legal documents that would destroy their sense of security, their illusion of control, their entire understanding of their situation. They'd realize, probably for the first time in 5 years, that the daughter they'd dismissed was actually the only thing keeping them from catastrophe. "One last thing," Marcus said as I stood to leave. "When they try to contact you, and they'll call, they'll text, they'll show up at your work, you do not engage. You do not answer. You do not explain or justify or defend. Every communication goes through me. You've said everything you need to say in these legal documents. Anything else is just giving them ammunition to manipulate you. And we're done with that game." I shook his hand again, then shook hands with Jennifer and the associates who'd helped build this case. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you for taking me seriously, for not telling me to work it out, or remember their family, or any of the other dismissive things people say when you try to set boundaries with relatives." "Zara," Marcus said, walking me to the elevator, "I've been practicing law for 23 years, and I've seen every kind of exploitation imaginable. What your family did to you isn't love. It's abuse wrapped in the language of obligation. You're not being cruel by protecting yourself. You're being sane. And 15 days from now, when they're packing boxes and facing reality, maybe, just maybe, they'll understand that actions have consequences and generosity has limits." I rode the elevator down to the lobby, walked out into the bright Atlanta morning, and immediately called the Ritz-Carlton. "I need a room for the next 3 weeks," I told the woman who answered, giving her Jennifer's name as a reference. "Something quiet, something secure. Somewhere I won't be found unless I want to be found." "We have an executive suite on the club level," she said, her voice professionally soothing. "Private elevator access, 24-hour concierge. And we can have someone pack your belongings and bring them over if you provide an address and access instructions." "That won't be necessary," I said, thinking of my office with its broken lock, my bedroom that felt contaminated by their presence. "I'll pack myself. I just need the room ready by noon." I hung up and sat in my car in the parking garage, staring at my phone. The smart home app showed me everything happening at the house in real time. My mother was in the kitchen, probably making lunch. My father was in the garage, probably pretending to fix something. Ebony was in her room, probably filming another delusional video about her lifestyle. Kyle was in my office, my destroyed office, probably using my Wi-Fi to upload content that would get 17 views. They had no idea that in 5 hours, a stranger would knock on the door and hand them a document that would end their world. They had no idea that the utilities keeping them comfortable had been scheduled for termination. They had no idea that the daughter they dismissed had just hired a legal team that specialized in destroying people who deserved it. I started the car and drove toward the house. Not to stay, but to pack the essentials, the things I couldn't leave behind. I'd give myself 30 minutes. Enough time to grab clothes and documents and anything irreplaceable. The rest could burn for all I cared, could be seized in the eviction, could become their problem to deal with or abandon. As I drove through the familiar streets of the neighborhood I'd technically owned for 5 years, I thought about that rent increase demand, that handwritten note demanding $3,500 or free labor. They'd thought it was a power move, thought they were finally putting me in my place. What they'd actually done was give me written evidence of their intent to exploit me, documentation of their belief that they controlled property they didn't own, proof that this wasn't a misunderstanding but a deliberate, calculated attempt to extract maximum value from someone they viewed as a resource rather than a person. That note, that stupid handwritten note demanding money I didn't owe, was now Exhibit A in a legal case that would leave them homeless. Sometimes the worst decisions people make aren't the big, dramatic ones. They're the small, petty, arrogant ones that reveal their true character and give their victims the ammunition needed to finally fight back. I had exactly 30 minutes to pack my life and get out before the process server arrived. 30 minutes to move through that house like a ghost, collecting the fragments of my existence before everything exploded. I parked on the street instead of the driveway. Didn't want Kyle or my father blocking me in. Didn't want anyone noticing I was packing to leave permanently instead of just going to work. The front door was unlocked as always, because why would they lock it when they believed they owned the place? when they felt entitled to every square inch, including my private spaces. I could hear the television blaring from the living room, could smell lunch cooking in the kitchen, probably something I'd bought, prepared in cookware I'd purchased, served on dishes I'd paid for. The mundane domesticity of it all felt obscene now. Felt like watching someone live comfortably in stolen luxury. I went straight upstairs to my bedroom, moving quickly but methodically. I'd learned from years of forensic investigations that panic makes you forget things, makes you leave behind evidence or valuables, so I forced myself into professional mode. Clear head, systematic approach, no emotional attachments. First priority: documents. I grabbed the fireproof safe from my closet, the one containing my passport, birth certificate, social security card, insurance policies, and the backup copies of the deed that I hadn't given to Marcus. The safe was small enough to carry but heavy enough that I had to use both hands, and as I lifted it, I saw the rectangular dust outline on the closet floor where it had sat for 5 years, protecting my identity while my family tried to erase my personhood. Second priority: technology. My backup laptop, my external hard drives containing encrypted client files, the tablet I used for video calls, all the charging cables and accessories. I threw them into a leather weekender bag I'd bought for a conference last year. A bag that had never been used because I'd been too afraid to leave this house for more than a day. Too worried about what would happen if I wasn't here to manage the chaos, to pay the bills, to keep everything from collapsing. Third priority: clothes. I grabbed a week's worth of professional attire. The blazers and slacks and blouses that signaled competence, the armor I wore into client meetings and court depositions. I grabbed workout clothes, casual clothes, pajamas, underwear, shoes. Everything went into a large suitcase with ruthless efficiency. No sentimentality, no careful folding. This wasn't packing for a trip. This was evacuating a disaster zone. I was moving through my closet when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, male footsteps that could only belong to my father. My bedroom door was open, and he appeared in the doorway. His expression shifting from confusion to suspicion as he saw the suitcase, the safe, the systematic dismantling of my presence. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice carrying that edge of authority he still believed he possessed. "Going somewhere, Zara." "Work trip," I lied smoothly, not looking at him, continuing to pack. "Last-minute client emergency. I'll be gone for a few weeks, maybe longer." Didn't have time to mention it at breakfast. He walked into my room, my private space, and stood there with his arms crossed, and I could see him processing the scene, trying to figure out if I was telling the truth or if something else was happening. "Awful lot of stuff for a work trip," he said, suspicion hardening into accusation. "Looks more like you're moving out. Like you're running away because we had a disagreement about your responsibilities to this family." I stopped packing and turned to face him, and I could see he was preparing for a fight, preparing to bully me into staying, to shame me into compliance the way he'd done my entire life. But he didn't know that the fight was already over, that the referee had already declared a winner, that in less than 4 hours a man with a badge would be handing him papers that would destroy every assumption he'd built his authority on. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice calm, neutral. "I'm not running away. I'm making a strategic business decision to relocate temporarily for work purposes. I'll be reachable by phone if there's an emergency. A real emergency. Not Ebony needing a babysitter or Kyle needing better Wi-Fi." His face reddened. That particular shade of purple that signaled his blood pressure was spiking, that his control was slipping. "You don't get to just leave," he said, his voice rising. "You live here, you have obligations here. Your mother and I expect you to fulfill the terms we discussed. You're either paying the $3,500, or you're watching those children. You don't get a third option where you just disappear." "Actually," I said, zipping the suitcase closed with a sound like finality, "I do get that option. I get every option, Dad, because this is my house, I'm the owner. And owners can leave their property whenever they want." He laughed. That same dismissive sound Kyle made. That sound that said I was delusional, that I didn't understand reality, that I needed to be corrected like a child who'd said something stupid. "Your house," he repeated, shaking his head. "You really believe that, don't you? You really think that because your name is on some paperwork that this is yours?" "Zara, I built this house. I've lived here for 30 years. I raised you here. This is my home, and you're a guest, a tenant, someone we've graciously allowed to stay because you're family. I picked up my suitcase and the weekender bag, slinging the bag over my shoulder. You're going to want to read any mail that comes today, I said, walking toward the door toward him, and I saw him tense, saw him consider physically blocking my path. You're going to want to read it very carefully, and you're going to want to call a lawyer, though I doubt you can afford one. What are you talking about? He demanded, but there was something new in his voice now. Not just anger, but the first hint of fear, the first crack in his certainty. What mail? What did you do? I didn't do anything, Dad, I said, stopping in the doorway, looking at him one last time. I just stopped doing everything. There's a difference, and you're about to learn exactly what that difference costs. I walked past him and he grabbed my arm. Not violently but firmly, the way he used to when I was a teenager and he wanted to keep me from leaving during an argument. Zara, you stop right now, he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous low register. You put those bags down and you explain what you're talking about. You're scaring your mother, you're being dramatic, and I won't tolerate this disrespect in my house. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. Take your hand off me, I said quietly, or in addition to the eviction notice you're about to receive, I'll add assault charges. Test me, Dad. I dare you. He released my arm like it had burned him, stepping back, his face cycling through confusion and anger and something that might have been the beginning of realization. I walked down the stairs, hearing my mother's voice calling from the kitchen. Bernard, what's happening? What's all that noise? I didn't stop to explain. I walked out the front door, loaded my bags into my car, and drove away, checking my rearview mirror to see my father standing on the porch, watching me leave. His expression unreadable from this distance. The Ritz-Carlton was everything my house wasn't. Quiet, clean, secure, and most importantly, mine by choice rather than by obligation. The suite they'd prepared was on the 23rd floor, accessible only by private elevator with a key card, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Peachtree Street, and a king-sized bed that looked like it had never been jumped on by toddlers or used as storage for fake designer boxes. I unpacked my bags with the same methodical efficiency I'd used to pack them, hanging clothes in the massive closet, setting up my laptop on the desk, plugging in my phone to charge. Then I sat on the pristine white sofa and waited, watching the clock on my phone tick toward 2 p.m., imagining the scene that was about to unfold 15 miles away in the suburbs. At exactly 1:58 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Process server en route. DA 2 minutes. Are you somewhere safe? Ritz-Carlton, club level, I typed back. Doors locked, phone charged, wine ordered. Let's do this. At 2:03 p.m. another text. Served. Your father signed receipt. He looked confused but took the documents. Server reports he started reading them on the porch. Should be getting to the good parts right about now. I set my phone down and walked to the window, looking out over the city, imagining my father standing on that porch reading words that were dismantling his reality sentence by sentence. Notice to quit. Unlawful occupation. No lease agreement. 15 days to vacate. Failure to comply will result in forcible removal by sheriff's deputy. I imagined him calling for my mother, his voice shaking, the paper trembling in his hands. I imagined my mother reading over his shoulder, her face going pale as she realized this wasn't a threat or a negotiation. This was legal action, official action, the kind of action that involved judges and courts and consequences they couldn't talk their way out of. I imagined the exact moment they got to the property owner section, the part where it listed Zara Williams, sole owner of record, and the date of the deed transfer. 5 years ago, the date they'd begged me to save them, the date they'd signed away their house because they'd gambled and lost and needed their daughter to rescue them. I imagined that moment of recognition, that sickening realization that every rent check they'd never written, every utility bill they'd never paid, every demand they'd made and every boundary they'd violated had been building toward this single catastrophic moment of reckoning. My phone rang. Not a text, a call, and I looked at the screen to see Dad calling, with a photo I'd taken years ago when we'd been a family, when I'd still believed that love and sacrifice were the same thing. I didn't answer. I watched it ring, watched it go to voicemail, watched the notification pop up. New voicemail from Dad. Immediately another call. Mom calling this time. Her contact photo showing her in her church clothes, smiling, looking nothing like the woman who'd told me I was selfish for not wanting to be a free nanny. I didn't answer that either. Then texts started flooding in, coming so fast my phone buzzed continuously like an angry hornet. Zara, call me right now. This is a mistake, you need to fix this. Call your father immediately, young lady. We need to talk about this right now. You can't do this to us, we're your parents. This is elder abuse, we're calling the police. I muted the notifications and poured myself a glass of the wine that room service had delivered. A beautiful Pinot Noir that cost $45 and tasted like freedom, like boundaries, like the beginning of a life where I didn't wake up every morning wondering what would be demanded of me today. Marcus texted again. They're calling my office, screaming at my assistant. I'm declining to speak with them until they retain their own counsel. This is going exactly as predicted. Shock, denial, anger, bargaining. They'll cycle through all the stages of grief before they land on acceptance. How long until acceptance? Texted back. Depends on the person, he replied. Some people never get there. They just stay angry forever, convinced they're the victim. But the eviction happens whether they accept it or not, so their feelings are irrelevant to the timeline. Another flood of texts, these ones from Ebony now. What did you do? Dad is freaking out. He says we have to leave in 15 days? That's insane. You can't kick us out, we have babies. This is so cruel, Zara, how can you do this to your own nieces and nephews? Everyone is going to know what kind of person you really are. You're going to regret this. I almost laughed at that last one. Regret this? Regret reclaiming my own property. Regret establishing boundaries with people who'd treated me like an ATM for 5 years. Regret prioritizing my mental health and financial security over their delusions. The only thing I regretted was not doing this sooner, not drawing this line the first time they crossed it, not understanding that some people will take everything you offer and then demand more, not because they need it but because they can. At 3:15 p.m., the texts stopped. Sudden silence after the storm, and I knew what that meant. They'd finally read the entire document, had gotten to the part about the restraining order. The part that said any attempt to contact me directly or show up at my workplace would result in immediate arrest. They'd realized that I wasn't negotiating, wasn't bluffing, wasn't going to cave under pressure because the pressure was now entirely on them. At 3:47 p.m., one final text came through, this one from my father, and it was different from the others. Not angry or demanding but cold and final. You have destroyed this family. Your mother is crying, your sister is terrified. And those children will remember that their aunt chose money over blood. We will never forgive you for this. You are dead to us. I read it twice, feeling nothing but a strange sense of relief, because dead to them meant they couldn't demand anything from a corpse, couldn't guilt-trip a ghost, couldn't exploit someone who no longer existed in their world. Good, I typed back, knowing it would be the last message I'd ever send them. Being dead to you is the most alive I've felt in 5 years. I blocked all their numbers. Dad, Mom, Ebony, even Kyle, though he hadn't texted, probably because he still didn't fully understand what was happening or how it affected him. I blocked them on social media, on email, on every platform where they could reach me. Then I called Marcus. They sent me a message saying I destroyed the family and I'm dead to them, I said when he answered. Good, he replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. That makes the next 15 days easier. When people cut you off emotionally, they usually make strategic mistakes legally. They'll stop trying to negotiate, stop trying to fix it, and just focus on being angry, which means they won't hire a lawyer, won't mount a defense, won't do any of the things that could potentially complicate this process. Your father just made this eviction foolproof. So what happens now? I asked, settling back into the sofa, feeling the tension leaving my shoulders for the first time in weeks. Now we wait, Marcus said. We wait for them to either leave voluntarily or ignore the deadline. My money's on ignore. People this entitled usually can't believe consequences apply to them until a sheriff is physically removing their belongings. So we prepare for the hearing, we document any further violations or damages, and in 15 days, We show up to court and get a judgment that allows law enforcement to escort them off the property. It's going to be clean, quick, and absolutely final. I hung up and looked around my hotel suite. My temporary sanctuary, my fortress of solitude. In 15 days I'd go back to that house. But it would be different then. It would be empty of their chaos, clean of their entitlement, free of their constant demands. It would just be a house. My house. Waiting for me to decide what came next, whether I'd live there alone, whether I'd sell it and move somewhere with no memories of family betrayal, whether I'd turn it into something entirely new. But that was a decision for future Zara. Present Zara had other priorities, like finishing the wine, ordering room service, taking a bath in a tub that nobody had flooded with toys, and sleeping through the night without being woken by bass, thumping DJ practice or toddlers screaming or parents demanding I sacrifice my career for their convenience. I opened my laptop and checked my work email. There was a message from the Munich client, asking if everything was okay, if we could reschedule the call I'd abruptly ended. My apologies for yesterday's interruption, I typed. I was dealing with a family emergency that has now been resolved permanently. I'm available tomorrow at the same time, and I guarantee there will be no further disruptions. I've upgraded my workspace security significantly. I hit send and smiled because it was true. My workspace security now included a locked hotel room on a private floor in a building with 24-hour security, and the only people who could get to me were people I actually wanted to see. The eviction notice had been served. The countdown had begun. And for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't the one watching the clock anxiously. They were. The first 3 days after the eviction notice was served were silent. Radio silence from my family. No calls, no texts, no emergency emails claiming someone was dying or the house was on fire. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, the eerie calm that signals something is building, pressure accumulating until it has to release somehow. I spent those 3 days working from my hotel suite, catching up on client cases I'd neglected while dealing with family chaos, rebuilding relationships with clients who'd witnessed the peanut butter incident, proving that I was still the competent professional they'd hired despite the personal catastrophe my life had temporarily become. The Munich client rescheduled our call and we completed the analysis without interruption. No toddlers, no broken locks, no family members treating my workspace like a public park. The Sterling Group sent over a new contract, actually increasing my retainer because the CFO I'd caught embezzling had been successfully prosecuted and they wanted me on permanent standby. My boss called to congratulate me and mentioned casually that the board had approved my promotion to head of financial investigations with a salary that made my previous 6-figure income look like an internship stipend. Everything in my professional life was ascending while my personal life was imploding, and the contrast was so stark it felt like living in 2 different universes simultaneously. On day 4, Marcus called with an update that made my coffee taste suddenly bitter. They hired a lawyer, he said, and I could hear in his voice that this was both expected and problematic. Harold Pemberton. He's a family law attorney who specializes in what he calls reconciliation advocacy. Basically, he takes cases where family members are in conflict and tries to force mediation, drags things out, plays on judges' sympathies about keeping families together. He's good at what he does, which is annoying, but he's not good enough to overcome the facts of your case. What does this mean for the timeline? I asked, setting down my coffee cup, feeling my stomach tighten with anxiety I thought I'd left behind. Does this delay the eviction? Can they stay longer? It means we're going to have a hearing instead of a default judgment, Marcus explained. Pemberton filed a response claiming that your parents have a verbal lease agreement, that they've been paying rent in the form of household contributions, and that you're retaliating against them for setting reasonable boundaries about childcare. It's complete fiction, but it's well-written fiction that requires us to respond formally. I felt rage bubble up in my chest. They were lying now, rewriting history and legal documents, claiming they'd been paying me when I had 5 years of bank statements proving the exact opposite. They never paid me a dime, Marcus. Not $1 in 5 years. I have documentation. I know you do, he interrupted calmly, and that's why we're going to win. But Pemberton is smart. He's not actually trying to win the case. He's trying to make you uncomfortable enough that you'll settle, That you'll agree to give them more time or some financial payout just to make this go away quietly. He's betting that you'll prioritize your privacy and your professional reputation over holding them accountable. He's betting wrong, I said flatly. I don't care if this becomes public. I don't care if they tell everyone at church that I'm a monster. I don't care if they go on social media and paint themselves as victims. The truth is documented, and I'm not backing down. Good, Marcus said, and I could hear him smiling. That's exactly what I wanted to hear because Pemberton just made a massive strategic error. He filed a motion to depose you, to question you under oath about your finances, your relationship with your family, your motivations for the eviction. He thinks he's going to rattle you, catch you in some contradiction, make you look vindictive or greedy. What he doesn't know is that you're a forensic accountant who testifies in court regularly, who doesn't rattle, and who has documentation that will bury his clients. When is the deposition? I asked, already mentally preparing, already organizing the evidence I'd need to bring. Next Tuesday, Marcus said. 10 a.m. at Pemberton's office. I'll be there with you, and we're going to turn his fishing expedition into a murder scene. Bring every bank statement, every receipt, every piece of evidence you have. We're not going to defend your decision to evict them. We're going to prosecute them for 5 years of financial exploitation, and we're going to do it while Pemberton's billable clock is running. I hung up and immediately opened my laptop, creating a new folder labeled Deposition Materials. I pulled every bank statement from the last 5 years, highlighted every mortgage payment in yellow, every utility payment in blue, every cash transfer to family members in red. I created a summary spreadsheet showing total contributions by category. Housing costs, utilities, groceries, medical expenses, entertainment subscriptions, cash gifts. The numbers were staggering even to me, and I'd been living this reality. $273,000 over 5 years, an average of $54,000 annually that I'd poured into supporting people who claimed I was selfish. That night, my phone rang from an unknown number. Not blocked, not in my contacts, just a local Atlanta number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up, maybe curiosity, maybe the need to hear what they'd say when they thought they could still manipulate me. Hello, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Zara, baby, it's Mom. Her voice was different, not angry or demanding, but soft, trembling, the voice she used when she wanted something and knew she couldn't bully her way into getting it. Please don't hang up. I know you blocked our numbers, but I'm calling from Mrs. Henderson's phone because we need to talk. We need to fix this before it's too late. There's nothing to fix, Mom, I said, walking to the window of my hotel suite, looking out at the city lights that had become my nightly meditation. There's a legal process happening, and it's going to continue regardless of this conversation. Legal process, she repeated, and I could hear tears in her voice. Real or manufactured, I couldn't tell anymore. Zara, that's your family you're talking about. Your father, your sister, your baby nephews. How can you reduce us to a legal process? How can you talk about us like we're strangers, like we're criminals? Because you are criminals, Mom, I said, and the words came out easier than I expected, like a truth I'd been holding back for years finally set free. You committed fraud. You used my credit card without permission. You lived in my house without paying rent. You destroyed my property and interfered with my business. Those are crimes, and the fact that you're related to me doesn't make them less criminal. It makes them more reprehensible because you exploited the trust that comes with family bonds. She was crying now, full sobs that sounded genuine, that probably were genuine because narcissists can feel real emotion when they're losing. They just can't feel it for anyone but themselves. We didn't exploit you, baby. We loved you, we raised you, we gave you a home and a family. Everything we did was because we thought we were helping you, teaching you about family responsibility, about contributing to something bigger than yourself. You want to talk about contribution? I asked, feeling my professional coldness descend like armor. Let's talk about contribution, Mom. I contributed $54,000 a year for 5 years. I contributed a mortgage payment every month that kept you from being homeless. I contributed utility payments that kept your lights on and your water running. I contributed groceries, medical bills, car repairs, and cash gifts that were never repaid. What did you contribute? What did you give me besides criticism, demands, and entitlement? Silence on the line. Not because she was thinking, but because she had no answer, because the question exposed a truth so obvious that even her practiced denial couldn't hide it. We gave you family, she finally said, her voice small. We gave you belonging, a place in something bigger than yourself. That's worth more than money, Zara. You can't put a price on family. You did though, I said. You put a price on family, $3,500 a month, or free childcare services valued at approximately $4,000 monthly. You literally wrote down a price, handed it to me, and told me that was the cost of remaining in your good graces. So don't tell me family is priceless when you're the ones who assigned it a dollar amount. More crying, louder now, and I could hear voices in the background. My father saying something harsh, my sister's voice rising in panic. Zara, please. My mother begged, desperation replacing manipulation now. Please just give us more time. 15 days isn't enough. We don't have money for deposits on an apartment. We don't have references because we've been out of the rental market for decades. We don't have anywhere to go. Your father's pride is destroyed. He's talking about living in his truck, about parking at rest stops. Ebony can't take the babies to shelters. They don't have car seats, they don't have proper documentation. Please, baby, just give us 90 days, just 3 months to figure something out. No, I said simply, and I heard her sharp intake of breath like I'd slapped her. You had 5 years to figure something out, 5 years to save money, to build credit, to prepare for the possibility that your free ride might end. You chose to spend that time exploiting me, mocking my career, demanding more instead of appreciating what you had. 90 days won't change anything. You'll just spend 3 months doing what you've done for 5 years, which is nothing productive while waiting for me to cave and rescue you again. So you're really going to do this, she said, and now the crying stopped, replaced by cold hardness that was probably closer to her real feelings. You're going to throw us out onto the street, let your father sleep in his truck, let your nephews end up in foster care because their mother has no home. You're going to destroy this family because we hurt your feelings, because we asked you to help out a little more than you wanted to. You didn't hurt my feelings, Mom, I said, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded, how completely done I was with her attempts to rewrite this story. You hurt my finances, my career, my mental health, my sense of safety in my own home. And you didn't ask me to help. You demanded it, you took it without asking, and when I finally set a boundary, you tried to extort me. So yes, I'm really going to do this, and in 12 days when the sheriff shows up, you're going to understand that consequences are real even when they come from people you've underestimated your entire life. I hung up before she could respond, blocked Mrs. Henderson's number, and sat down heavily on the sofa. My hands were shaking, not from guilt or second thoughts, but from adrenaline, from the physiological response to confrontation even when you know you're right. That night I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop my brain from spinning through scenarios. What if they really did end up homeless? What if the twins suffered because of this? What if my father's pride drove him to something desperate? What if I was making a mistake that I'd regret for the rest of my life? At 2 a.m. I called Marcus, knowing he'd probably be asleep but not caring, needing someone to tell me I wasn't a monster. Zara, he answered, voice groggy but alert. What's wrong? Did something happen? Am I doing the right thing? I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how much I needed validation from someone who wasn't emotionally invested in my family's survival. They called me. My mother called from someone else's phone and told me my father's going to live in his truck, that the twins might end up in foster care. Marcus, what if I'm destroying innocent people's lives because I'm angry? There was a long pause, and when Marcus spoke, his voice was clear, firm, the voice of someone who'd seen this pattern 1,000 times before. Zara, listen to me very carefully. Your father is not going to live in his truck. Your nephews are not going to foster care. Your family is engaging in emotional terrorism, painting worst-case scenarios to manipulate you into backing down, but none of those scenarios are real. Your father has a pension, small, but sufficient for a 1-bedroom apartment if he budgets properly. Your mother works part-time. Between their incomes, they can afford housing, just not the free housing they've become accustomed to. Ebony is an able-bodied adult with a husband who, while useless, is also able-bodied. They can work, they can rent, they can apply for assistance programs if needed. What they can't do is continue living off your labor while treating you like garbage, and that's what they're really upset about. Not homelessness, but accountability. But what if I'm wrong? I pressed, needing to hear it again. What if something terrible happens and it's my fault? Then it's still not your fault, Marcus said firmly. You are not responsible for grown adults who refuse to take responsibility for themselves. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And you are not required to martyr yourself on the altar of family loyalty when that loyalty only flows in one direction. The question isn't whether you're doing the right thing. The question is whether you're finally going to choose yourself after spending 5 years choosing them. So I'm asking you directly. Are you backing down, or are we proceeding with the eviction? I thought about the broken lock on my office door, the ruined face cream, the peanut butter incident that almost cost me a major client. I thought about sleeping in my car because my brother-in-law needed to practice his DJ set. I thought about being told I was selfish while paying every bill, about being called ungrateful while sacrificing my peace for their comfort. We're proceeding, I said, and I heard Marcus exhale with relief. We're proceeding to the deposition, to the hearing, to the eviction. I'm not backing down. I'm done being their safety net while they treat me like a trampoline. Good, Marcus said. Now get some sleep because Tuesday is going to be a long day. And you're going to need to be sharp when Pemberton tries to paint you as the villain. We're going to show him exactly who the villains are. And we're going to do it with bank statements and receipts and documentation that doesn't lie even when people do. I hung up and finally felt the tension leave my body. Felt my breathing slow. Felt the certainty return that I was on the right path, even if it was the hardest path I'd ever walked. The deposition was in 5 days. The eviction hearing was in 9 days. The deadline was in 12 days. And somewhere in that suburban house, my family was probably plotting their next move, their next manipulation, their next attempt to make me feel guilty for refusing to be their perpetual victim. But I had something they didn't. I had the truth, I had documentation. And I had finally learned that the most powerful word in the English language is a 2-letter word that I'd been too afraid to say for 5 years. Well, just no. And I was about to say it so loudly that even a judge would hear it. The law offices of Harold Pemberton occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated historic building in Midtown Atlanta, the kind of space that screamed expensive but not quite elite, exposed brick walls, trendy industrial lighting, a reception area decorated with inspirational quotes about family and reconciliation rendered in pretentious typography. I walked in at exactly 9:45 on Tuesday morning wearing my most severe black suit, the one I reserved for depositions where I needed to look like someone who ate fraud for breakfast and spit out indictments by lunch. Marcus was already there, sitting in the waiting area reviewing notes on his tablet, and when he saw me, he stood and gave me a small nod of approval. "You look terrifying," he said quietly. "That's exactly the energy we need. Remember, you're not on trial here, they are. Pemberton is going to try to make this about your character, your motivations, your alleged vindictiveness. But every question he asks is an opportunity for us to present evidence of their exploitation. You stay calm, you answer truthfully, and you let the documents do the heavy lifting. I've testified in 14 fraud cases," I reminded him, adjusting the leather portfolio containing my meticulously organized evidence. "I know how depositions work. You tell the truth slowly and make them regret every question." At exactly 10 a.m., a paralegal emerged from the conference room and gestured for us to enter. The room was generic corporate. Long table, uncomfortable chairs, video camera set up in the corner to record the proceedings, and at the head of the table sat Harold Pemberton himself. He was exactly what I expected. Late 50s, gray hair styled to look distinguished, expensive suit that fit just a little too well, and a smile that was probably meant to be disarming but came across as condescending. "Ms. Williams," he said, standing to shake my hand with a grip that held on just a fraction too long. "Thank you for coming today. I know this must be difficult for you. Having to formalize family disagreements in a legal setting. I want you to know that my goal here isn't to attack you. It's to understand the situation so we can hopefully find a path forward that honors both your needs and your family's welfare. I smiled politely and said nothing, because I recognized a manipulation opening when I heard one. Recognized the setup for reasonable attorney tries to help difficult woman see sense. I sat down, Marcus beside me, and placed my portfolio on the table while the court reporter prepared her equipment. "Let's begin," Pemberton said, settling into his chair with the confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times and believed he knew how it would end. "Ms. Williams, can you state your full name and occupation for the record?" "Zara Christine Williams. I'm head of financial investigations at Sterling Forensic Group, specializing in embezzlement detection, asset tracing, and fraud analysis." I watched his eyebrows rise slightly. He'd expected me to just say accountant. Had probably assumed I pushed numbers in a cubicle rather than testifying in federal court cases. "And how long have you held this position?" he asked, flipping through notes that I suspected were more props than actual reference materials. "I was promoted to head of financial investigations 6 days ago," I said. "Prior to that, I was a senior forensic analyst for 3 years, and before that, a junior analyst for 2 years. I've been with Sterling for 5 years total, and I hold a master's degree in forensic accounting from Emory University." Pemberton nodded, making a show of taking notes. "Impressive credentials. Now let's talk about your living situation. You currently reside at 422 Maple Drive. Is that correct?" "That's the address of a property I own," I corrected. "I'm currently residing elsewhere due to safety concerns and the ongoing legal proceedings." "Safety concerns," he repeated, latching onto the phrase like a dog with a bone. "Can you elaborate on these alleged safety concerns? Has someone threatened you? Has there been violence? There's been property destruction, breaking and entering, interference with my professional work, and escalating boundary violations," I said calmly. "My office door was forcibly broken on November 2nd while I was on a conference call with international clients. Personal property valued at over $2,000 was destroyed. Children were left in my locked workspace without my consent while I was conducting business. These actions created a hostile work environment in what's legally my home office, which constitutes both a professional liability and a personal safety issue." I watched Pemberton's confidence flicker. He hadn't expected me to frame it in legal terms, hadn't anticipated that I'd describe my family's actions as crimes rather than misunderstandings. "But these were family members, correct?" he pressed. "Your sister's children placed in your care by your mother? Surely this was a family child care arrangement, not a hostile act." "It was trespassing and property destruction," I said, pulling out the first document from my portfolio. A printed photograph of my broken office door, the splintered wood, the destroyed lock mechanism. "This is Exhibit A. Photographic evidence of forced entry into a locked private workspace. The door was equipped with a deadbolt and a standard lock, both engaged. My brother-in-law, Kyle Morrison, used tools to remove the door hinges and break the lock mechanism. This occurred at approximately 10:15 a.m. on November 2nd, while I was conducting a video conference with a client representing a $40,000 contract." Pemberton took the photo, examined it, and I could see him recalculating his strategy in real time. "Ms. Williams, I understand you're upset about property damage, but let's put this in context. You were living in your parents' home." "My home," I interrupted. "I own the property. My parents are residents without a lease agreement." He paused, shuffled his papers, tried again. "You purchased the home from your parents?" "No, I refinanced their mortgage in my name 5 years ago when they faced foreclosure due to gambling debts totaling approximately $200,000. The deed transfer was executed on March 15, 2020, and recorded with Fulton County. I have the documentation here." I slid Exhibit B across the table, a certified copy of the deed showing the grantor and grantee, the date, the notary seal. Pemberton stared at it for a long moment, and I could see the foundation of his case crumbling in real time. "Your client, Mr. Bernard Williams, claimed in his response that he's been the owner of the property for 30 years. Marcus interjected smoothly, speaking for the first time. "That was a factual misrepresentation, counselor. Your client committed perjury in his legal filing. That's something we'll be addressing separately." Pemberton's face reddened slightly. Perhaps there was confusion about the ownership structure. There was no confusion, I said. There was deliberate misrepresentation. My parents knew I owned the property because they signed the deed transfer. They participated in the closing. They witnessed the notarization. What they did was pretend to themselves and others that the ownership structure hadn't changed because acknowledging it would injure their pride and undermine their authority. That's denial, not confusion, and it doesn't constitute a legal defense. Pemberton regrouped, trying a different angle. Ms. Williams, let's discuss the rent arrangement. Your parents claim they've been paying $1,500 monthly. They've been paying $0 monthly, I interrupted again, and this time I pulled out a thick stack of bank statements, each one tabbed with colored markers. Exhibit C. 60 months of mortgage payments, each one initiated from my personal checking account ending in 7-7-4-2. Account holder, Zara Williams. No deposits from Bernard or Loretta Williams during this entire period. Exhibit D. Utility bills for electricity, water, gas, and internet, all in my name, all paid from my accounts. Exhibit E. Property tax payments, homeowners insurance, HOA fees, all paid by me. Total housing costs over 5 years, $147,000, all documented, all traceable, all paid exclusively by me. I spread the documents across the table like a poker player revealing a royal flush, and Pemberton's expression shifted from confident to concerned to something approaching dread. Surely there were other contributions, he tried weakly. Household maintenance, groceries, shared expenses? I'm glad you asked, I said, pulling out another section of my portfolio. Exhibit F. Grocery receipts showing purchases charged to my credit card, totaling approximately $800 monthly for 5 years. That's $48,000 in food costs. Exhibit G. Maintenance and repair invoices, all paid by me because when my father fixed things, he typically made them worse, necessitating professional repairs I funded. Exhibit H. Medical copays, prescription costs, and emergency expenses for family members, totaling approximately $12,000 over 5 years. Exhibit I. Cash transfers to my sister Ebony Williams for various failed business ventures, totaling $32,000, none of which was repaid despite promises of repayment. The table was now covered in evidence, in documentation, in the irrefutable mathematical proof that I had funded every aspect of my family's existence while they contributed nothing but criticism and demands. Pemberton looked at the mountain of paper, then at me, then at Marcus, and I saw the exact moment he realized he'd accepted a case that was legally and factually indefensible. Let's take a 10-minute break, he said, his voice tight. I need to consult with my clients. Your clients aren't here, Marcus observed. You're representing them without their presence at this deposition. They were advised to attend but declined, Pemberton said, standing abruptly. They found the prospect too emotionally difficult. They found the prospect of answering questions under oath too legally dangerous, I corrected. They knew that every word spoken here would be recorded and could be used against them. So they sent you to fish for ammunition while keeping their own lies safely unrecorded. That's not emotional difficulty, counselor. That's legal strategy. And it's a poor one because now you're realizing that everything they told you was fiction. Pemberton left the room without responding, and Marcus turned to me with something approaching glee in his usually professional demeanor. You're enjoying this, he said. I've never seen someone dismantle an opposing case so efficiently in a deposition. You're not just answering questions. You're prosecuting them. I told you, I said, organizing my documents back into neat stacks. I testify in fraud cases regularly. This isn't my first time explaining to a room full of lawyers why the numbers prove someone is lying. It's just the first time the liars are related to me. When Pemberton returned 15 minutes later, he looked like a man who'd just gotten bad news from a doctor. He sat down heavily, adjusted his tie, and cleared his throat. Ms. Williams, my clients have asked me to explore the possibility of a settlement. They're willing to vacate the property within 45 days instead of the court-ordered 15 if you'll agree to provide a modest relocation stipend. Say $15,000, to help with moving costs and security deposits for a new residence. I looked at Marcus, who shook his head fractionally, then back at Pemberton. "No," I said simply. "No." Pemberton repeated, as if he'd misheard. "Ms. Williams, $15,000 is a fraction of what you earn annually. It would provide your family with dignity, would allow them to relocate without trauma, would preserve some semblance of family relationships." "Mr. Pemberton," I interrupted, leaning forward, letting him see the cold finality in my eyes. "I have spent $273,000 over 5 years providing my family with dignity, comfort, and stability. They responded by demanding I pay more or become free labor. They broke into my office, destroyed my property, interfered with my career, and when I finally set a boundary, they tried to extort me and then sued me using lies you believed without verification. I'm not giving them $15,000. I'm not giving them $1,500. I'm not giving them $15. What I'm giving them is exactly what they're legally entitled to. 15 days notice and the dignity of leaving voluntarily before the sheriff physically removes them." Pemberton's jaw tightened. "You're going to destroy your relationship with your family over money?" "They destroyed the relationship," I said. "I'm just acknowledging that destruction and refusing to fund it anymore. There's a difference, and that difference is clearly documented in exhibits through I currently spread across your conference table." "This deposition is concluded," Marcus said, standing and collecting our documents. "Mr. Pemberton," I interrupted, leaning forward, letting him see the cold finality in my eyes. "I have spent $273,000 over 5 years providing my family with dignity, comfort, and stability. They responded by demanding I pay more or become free labor. They broke into my office, destroyed my property, interfered with my career, and when I finally set a boundary, they tried to extort me and then sued me using lies you believed without verification. I'm not giving them $15,000. I'm not giving them $1,500. I'm not giving them $15. What I'm giving them is exactly what they're legally entitled to. 15 days notice and the dignity of leaving voluntarily before the sheriff physically removes them." Pemberton's jaw tightened. "You're going to destroy your relationship with your family over money?" "They destroyed the relationship," I said. "I'm just acknowledging that destruction and refusing to fund it anymore. There's a difference, and that difference is clearly documented in exhibits through I currently spread across your conference table." "This deposition is concluded," Marcus said, standing and collecting our documents. "Mr. Pemberton, I suggest you advise your clients to vacate voluntarily, rather than forcing a court hearing where all of this evidence will become public record. Family court proceedings are open to the public in Georgia. That means anyone can attend, including journalists, which means your client's financial exploitation of their daughter could become a matter of public record. I don't think that's the kind of publicity anyone wants, especially people who apparently value their church reputation." We walked out of that office building into the bright Tuesday afternoon, and I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Felt the validation of having my truth confirmed by someone else's reaction to the evidence. "He's going to advise them to leave," Marcus said as we stood on the sidewalk. "That deposition destroyed any hope he had of defending them. He took that case thinking he was representing wronged parents being evicted by an ungrateful daughter, and he just discovered he's representing financial predators who got caught. No attorney wants to stand in front of a judge and defend that, especially not when the plaintiff is a forensic accountant who brought receipts, literally. So it's over?" I asked, almost afraid to believe it. "Almost," Marcus said. "We still have the hearing in 7 days, but after today, I'd bet money they don't even show up. Pemberton is probably on the phone right now telling them they have no case, that fighting this will only make things worse, that their best option is to pack quietly and leave with whatever dignity they have left. And if they don't listen to him, if they force us to go to court, then we present all of this evidence to Judge Hendricks, who will rule in your favor within minutes and possibly sanction them for filing a frivolous response." I got in my car and drove back to the Ritz-Carlton, my fortress of peace, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I could breathe fully, like the weight that had been crushing my chest for 5 years had finally lifted. That night, I ordered champagne from room service. Expensive champagne, the kind that costs more than my parents' weekly grocery budget. And I toasted to myself, to boundaries, to documentation, to the liberating power of finally saying no to people who'd been told yes their entire lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Pemberton just filed a withdrawal of representation. He's officially off the case. Your family is now unrepresented, which means they'll either hire a new attorney in the next 6 days, unlikely given their finances, or they'll face the judge alone. Either way, we won. I read the message 3 times. Let it sink in. Let myself feel the satisfaction of watching a house of lies collapse under the weight of mathematical truth. 7 days until the hearing. 7 days until the judge made it official. 7 days until I could go home to a house that was finally, actually legally just mine. The Fulton County Courthouse was exactly what you'd expect from a government building trying to look important on a limited budget. Marble floors worn dull by decades of foot traffic, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look vaguely ill, and the particular smell of old paper and institutional cleaning products that seems universal to legal buildings everywhere. I arrived at 8:30 for a 9 a.m. hearing, dressed in the same severe black suit I'd worn to the deposition, carrying a leather briefcase that contained enough documentation to bury my family under an avalanche of mathematical proof. Marcus was already there, standing near the courtroom entrance, and when he saw me he actually smiled. Not his professional attorney smile, but a genuine expression of satisfaction. "They're here," he said quietly, gesturing toward a bench across the hallway where my family sat huddled together like refugees from a disaster they'd caused themselves. They showed up without an attorney, which means they're either going to represent themselves or they're going to beg the judge for more time to find representation. Either way, this hearing is going to be short and extremely unpleasant for them. I looked across the hallway and saw them for the first time since I'd packed my bags and left. My father looked diminished somehow, smaller than I remembered, wearing a suit that was slightly too large, like he'd lost weight from stress. My mother sat beside him, clutching her purse with white knuckles, her hair uncombed, her church clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. Ebony was there with both twins, the children squirming and fussing, drawing annoyed looks from other people waiting for hearings. Kyle was notably absent, probably because he'd finally realized that his spiritual guru persona wouldn't play well in a courtroom where consequences were real. My mother saw me first, and our eyes met across that institutional hallway. I watched her face cycle through emotions: hope, anger, desperation, something that might have been shame but was probably just fear. She stood up, started to walk toward me, and I saw Marcus tense beside me, ready to intervene. "Zara," she called out, her voice echoing off the marble walls, drawing attention from lawyers and clients and court staff who turned to watch the family drama unfold. "Zara, please, we need to talk before we go in there. Please, baby, just 5 minutes." "Ma'am, you need to stay back," Marcus said, stepping slightly in front of me, his voice professionally firm. "There's a restraining order in place. You're not permitted to approach my client or attempt communication outside of official legal proceedings." "She's my daughter," my mother said, and now tears were streaming down her face. Genuine or performed, I no longer cared to distinguish. "I have a right to talk to my own daughter, to explain, to apologize, to make her understand that we never meant to hurt her, that we love her." "You had 5 years to apologize," I said, my voice carrying across the hallway, cold and clear. "You had 5 years to show love through actions instead of just words. You had 60 months, 1,800 days, approximately 43,000 hours to treat me like a person instead of a resource. You didn't take any of those opportunities, so no, you don't get 5 minutes now to perform remorse because you're facing consequences." The bailiff appeared in the courtroom doorway, a large man with the expression of someone who'd seen every variety of human drama and was unimpressed by all of it. "Williams versus Williams," he called out. "Judge Hendricks is ready. All parties enter and take your seats." The courtroom was smaller than I expected from television. Maybe 20 rows of benches, a judge's elevated platform, a witness stand, and an American flag that had seen better days. Marcus and I sat at the plaintiff's table on the right side. My family filed into the defendant's area on the left, and I noticed how they kept glancing at our table, At the organized stacks of documents Marcus was arranging, at the professional briefcases and tablets that signaled we were prepared while they carried nothing but desperation. Judge Patricia Hendricks entered from her chambers, and everyone stood automatically. She was a black woman in her early 60s, wearing glasses that hung on a chain around her neck, carrying herself with the no-nonsense authority of someone who'd been adjudicating family disputes for 30 years and had run out of patience for bullshit approximately 29 years ago. "Be seated," she said, settling into her chair and opening a folder that I assumed contained our case file. "We're here for a dispossessory action, Williams versus Williams, case number 2024 EV 8847. Mr. Chen, you're representing the plaintiff." "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said, standing. "Marcus Chen for Zara Williams, property owner seeking eviction of unauthorized occupants." "And the defendants?" Judge Hendricks looked at my family, her expression already showing hints of disapproval at their lack of legal representation. "Are you represented by counsel?" My father stood awkwardly, his suit jacket hanging loose on his frame. "No, Your Honor." Our attorney withdrew from the case. "We couldn't afford another one on such short notice. We're representing ourselves, and we're asking the court for mercy, for understanding of our situation." "Mr. Williams, this court doesn't deal in mercy," Judge Hendricks said, her voice cutting through his appeal like a scalpel. "This court deals in law, in facts, in documented evidence. If you couldn't afford an attorney, you should have prepared yourself to present a legal defense, which means evidence, not emotions. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," my father said, sitting down heavily, and I saw the reality landing on him. This wasn't going to be a conversation where he could charm or manipulate or play the wounded patriarch. This was a courtroom where his words meant nothing without proof. "Mr. Chen, present your case," Judge Hendricks said, turning her attention to us. Marcus stood and launched into a presentation that was simultaneously compassionate and devastating. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of property owner seeking removal of occupants who have no lease agreement, pay no rent, and have engaged in property destruction and interference with the owner's business operations. The plaintiff, Ms. Zara Williams, is the sole legal owner of the property at 422 Maple Drive, having purchased it via deed transfer in March 2020 when the previous owners, her parents, the defendants, faced foreclosure due to gambling debts. He slid the deed across to the bailiff, who handed it to Judge Hendricks. She examined it carefully, comparing it to something in her case file. "This deed shows the defendants as grantors, transferring ownership to the plaintiff," she said. "Mr. Williams, you signed this document. You participated in this transfer. Why are you now claiming ownership?" My father stood again, and I could see him struggling to find words that would make this sound reasonable. "Your Honor, that was supposed to be temporary. My daughter agreed to help us through a difficult time, to use her credit to refinance. But the understanding was that the house would remain ours, that she was just helping us, not taking ownership." "Did you put that understanding in writing?" Judge Hendricks asked. "Was there a contract stipulating that ownership would revert to you at some point?" "No, Your Honor, it was a family agreement, a verbal understanding between a father and daughter who trusted each other." "Mr. Williams, verbal agreements about property transfers are not legally binding in Georgia," she said, and I could hear the annoyance creeping into her voice. "If you wanted to maintain ownership, you should have structured the refinancing differently. You didn't. You signed over the deed. That makes your daughter the owner and you the occupant, and without a written lease agreement, you have no legal right to remain in that property." Marcus continued, handing over exhibit after exhibit. Bank statements showing 5 years of mortgage payments from my account, utility bills in my name, property tax receipts, the photographic evidence of the destroyed office door, the police report I'd filed for breaking and entering. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has not only allowed the defendants to live rent-free for 60 months, she has also funded all housing costs, utilities, and maintenance totaling over $270,000. In return, the defendants destroyed her property, interfered with her professional work, causing potential loss of a $40,000 contract, and when she attempted to set boundaries, They issued an ultimatum demanding either excessive rent payments or forced labor in the form of unpaid childcare services. Judge Hendricks was reading through the bank statements, her expression darkening with each page she turned. "Mr. Williams, is it true that you've paid no rent for 5 years?" My father stood, his face flushed. "We contributed in other ways, Your Honor. I maintained the property, fixed things that broke, kept the lawn mowed. My wife helped with household management. We provided a family environment for our daughter who would otherwise be alone." "Did you document these contributions?" Judge Hendricks asked. "Do you have receipts for materials purchased for repairs, invoices for services rendered, any written record of this alleged value exchange?" "No, Your Honor, but—" "Then you have no evidence of contribution," she interrupted. "What you're describing is normal family household cooperation, not rent payment. If I let my adult child live with me and they mow the lawn occasionally, that doesn't constitute rent. That's just being a decent member of a household. The difference here is that your daughter owns the property and you don't, which makes you a guest who has severely overstayed their welcome." My mother stood up, unable to contain herself any longer. "Your Honor, she's punishing us because we asked her to help with her sister's children. She's vindictive because we set reasonable boundaries about her contributing to the family. This isn't about rent or property ownership. This is about a selfish daughter who values money more than family." "Mrs. Williams, sit down," Judge Hendricks said, her voice sharp as a whip crack. "You don't speak in my courtroom unless I ask you a direct question, and when I do want your input, I assure you I will not want to hear emotional manipulation disguised as legal argument. Your daughter asked you to leave her private workspace. You broke down her locked door, and you destroyed property valued at thousands of dollars. That's not setting boundaries. That's criminal trespass and vandalism. The fact that you're related doesn't make it legal." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of one of the twins whimpering, and I watched my mother sink back into her seat, her face crumbling as she realized that the judge was not impressed by tears, not swayed by appeals to family loyalty, not interested in anything except the legal facts of the case. "I've heard enough," Judge Hendricks said, closing the folder in front of her. "Mr. Williams, Mrs. Williams, I'm going to explain something to you that should have been obvious from the beginning. Your daughter saved you from homelessness 5 years ago by using her excellent credit and her financial resources to refinance a property you'd gambled into foreclosure. In exchange for this extraordinary generosity, she asked for nothing except to be treated with basic respect and to maintain boundaries around her professional workspace. You responded by exploiting her generosity, destroying her property, interfering with her career, and then attempting to extort additional money when she finally pushed back. This court finds your behavior appalling, your legal position non-existent, and your claim of family loyalty laughably hypocritical." She picked up her gavel, and I knew what was coming before she spoke. Judgment for the plaintiff. The defendants are ordered to vacate the property at 422 Maple Drive within 72 hours. That's 3 days, not 15, because your conduct has been so egregious that I see no reason to extend you additional courtesies you clearly don't deserve. If you are not out in 72 hours, the sheriff will physically remove you and your belongings. Additionally, I'm ordering you to pay the plaintiff's legal fees totaling $12,000, to be paid within 90 days or face wage garnishment. Do you understand this order?" My father stood on shaking legs. "Your Honor, 3 days. We can't possibly find housing in 3 days. We have children, we have belongings, we need time. You had 15 days from the initial notice," Judge Hendricks said, her voice icy. "You chose to spend that time hiring an attorney to fight instead of hiring a moving company to pack. You chose litigation over logistics, and that was your mistake, not the court's problem. 3 days, Mr. Williams. I suggest you start making phone calls." She banged the gavel once, a sound of absolute finality, and stood. "This court is adjourned." The bailiff called out, "All rise," and Judge Hendricks disappeared into her chambers, taking with her my family's last hope of avoiding the consequences they'd spent 5 years earning. I sat there for a moment, letting the reality sink in. It was over. Not in 15 days, not in a week, but in 72 hours. 3 days from now, that house would be legally mine in practice as well as in theory, empty of their chaos, clean of their entitlement, free of their constant demands. Marcus was packing up his briefcase, organizing the exhibits we hadn't even needed to present because the judge had seen enough within the first 10 minutes to make her decision. "Well," he said quietly, "that was even faster than I predicted. Judge Hendricks does not suffer financial exploitation gladly, especially when it involves family members taking advantage of the responsible child. You just got the fastest eviction ruling I've seen in 15 years of practice." Across the aisle, my family was standing in a small huddle, my mother sobbing into my father's shoulder, Ebony holding both twins and looking shell-shocked, my father staring at the judge's empty bench like he couldn't process what had just happened. I stood to leave, to walk out of that courtroom and back into my life, but my father's voice stopped me. "Zara." Just my name, spoken in a tone I'd never heard from him before. Not angry, not demanding, not authoritative. Broken. I turned to look at him, and for the first time in my entire life, my father looked small, defeated, stripped of the masculine pride and patriarchal authority he'd worn like armor my whole childhood. "3 days," he said, and his voice cracked. "How are we supposed to find a place to live in 3 days? How are we supposed to come up with deposits and first month's rent when we have nothing saved? Zara, I'm begging you. I'm begging my daughter. Please give us more time. Please show mercy." I looked at this man who'd told me I was selfish, who'd let Kyle destroy my office, who'd stood by while my mother demanded I become a free nanny or pay extortion-level rent. I looked at him and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no guilt, no familial obligation. Just the cold, clear certainty that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face the consequences they've earned. "Dad," I said quietly, "you had 5 years of mercy. You had 60 months of generosity. You had $250,000 worth of compassion. What you're asking for now isn't mercy. It's enabling, and I'm done being your enabler. You have 3 days because that's what the judge ordered. And unlike you, I respect legal boundaries and judicial decisions. I suggest you start packing." I walked out of that courtroom with Marcus beside me, my heels clicking on the marble floor with each step taking me further from the family I'd tried to save and closer to the life I'd finally chosen for myself. Behind me, I heard my mother's wails echoing off the walls, heard Ebony's voice rising in panic, heard my father's gruff commands to, "Be quiet, we're in a courthouse." I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. I just kept walking toward the exit, toward the sunlight streaming through the courthouse doors, toward the parking lot where my car waited to take me back to the hotel, back to peace, back to a life where 3-day deadlines were someone else's problem and eviction notices finally had teeth. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked as we stood on the courthouse steps, the Atlanta heat wrapping around us like a blanket. "Honestly," I said, looking up at the cloudless sky, feeling the weight of 5 years lifting off my shoulders like a physical force. "I feel free." The first 24 hours after the court ruling were radio silence. No calls, no texts, no tearful voicemails begging for reconsideration. It was the kind of silence that meant they were either accepting reality and packing, or they were in complete denial, sitting in that house pretending the judge's order didn't exist, hoping that if they ignored it long enough it would somehow disappear like a bad dream. I spent that first day at the Ritz working remotely, fielding calls from clients, reviewing contracts, living my actual life while occasionally checking the smart home app on my phone that showed me real-time status of the house. The cameras I'd installed months ago, hidden in smoke detectors and air vents, originally meant to document Kyle's invasions of my office, now gave me a bird's-eye view of the chaos unfolding in my absence. At 2 in the afternoon on day 1, I watched my mother standing in the living room surrounded by those 20 boxes of fake designer goods, crying while Ebony filmed her on a phone, probably creating some sob story content about being unfairly evicted by a heartless daughter. At 4 p.m. I saw my father in the garage loading his truck with tools. My tools, the ones I'd bought to fix things he'd broken, and I made a mental note to add theft to the list of charges if he actually tried to take them. By 6 p.m. Kyle finally appeared, pulling up in a rental moving truck that probably cost more than he'd earned in the last 6 months, and I watched him and my father start loading furniture. The sectional sofa I'd purchased, the dining room table I'd picked out, The king-sized mattress from the master bedroom that I'd bought when my father's back problems got so bad he couldn't sleep. They were taking my belongings, items I'd paid for, treating the house like a estate sale where everything was free. Called Marcus immediately. "They're stealing my furniture," I said, watching the live feed as Kyle struggled to lift my coffee table. "They're loading a moving truck with items I purchased. Can we do anything about this?" "Technically, we'd need to prove ownership of each individual item," Marcus said, and I could hear him typing, probably pulling up legal precedents. "Do you have receipts for the furniture?" "I have receipts for everything," I said, because of course I did. I was a forensic accountant who documented every purchase. "I have credit card statements, delivery confirmations, assembly instructions with my name on the orders. Every piece of furniture in that house has a paper trail leading back to my accounts." "Send me the documentation," Marcus said. "I'll have the sheriff add those items to the eviction order as plaintiff's property that cannot be removed. It'll take me about an hour to get it filed, so if you want to stop them tonight, you might need to take more direct action." I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds, then made a decision that felt petty and perfect and absolutely justified. I opened the smart home app and navigated to the power controls. Yes, I'd installed smart breakers in the electrical panel months ago, ostensibly for energy monitoring but really for exactly this kind of situation. I selected every circuit in the house except the refrigerator and the security system, and I cut the power. On the camera feed, I watched the lights die, watched the house plunge into darkness, watched Kyle drop the end of the coffee table and start yelling. My phone rang within seconds. Unknown number, which meant they were calling from someone else's phone again. I answered and put it on speaker. "You cut the power," my father's voice exploded through the line. "It's 6:30 at night, Zara. It's getting dark and you cut the power. There are children in this house, babies who need light. And you're playing games with electricity." "I'm not playing games, Dad," I said calmly, watching him on camera pacing in the darkened living room with his phone flashlight on. "I'm protecting my property. I can see on the security cameras that you're loading my furniture into a moving truck. Furniture I purchased that I have receipts for, that legally belongs to me. You can take your personal belongings, your clothes, your photos, your fake designer boxes. But my furniture stays until the sheriff can inventory it. These are household items," he shouted. "Community property from a family home. You can't just claim everything is yours." "Actually I can," I said, "because I have receipts proving I paid for it, which makes it legally mine. But if you want to test this theory, keep loading that truck and I'll have the sheriff meet you at your destination and arrest you for theft. Your choice. Pack your actual belongings in the dark, or go to jail for stealing mine." The line went dead. He'd hung up on me, probably the first time in my life he'd done that, because usually I was the one being hung up on, the one being dismissed. I watched the camera feed for another 10 minutes, and eventually they brought out flashlights and battery-powered lanterns, and they stopped loading furniture. They started bringing out trash bags full of clothes instead, cardboard boxes labeled with marker, the detritus of their lives that they could legitimately claim as their own. By midnight, the moving truck was half full and they were all exhausted, sitting on the front porch because the house was too dark and too hot without power. I'd also disabled the HVAC system because why should I pay to cool a house for people who were stealing from me? Day 2 started with a text from Marcus. "Sheriff approved the property inventory. I'm sending a deputy over at 9 a.m. to photograph and catalog all furniture, appliances, and fixtures purchased by you. Your family cannot remove any documented items without facing criminal charges. Also, I filed the documentation on the utility shutoff. It's legal because they're not tenants with a lease, just occupants being evicted. You're not obligated to provide them with services during the eviction period." At 8:45, I watched on camera as a sheriff's deputy arrived, a tall woman with a no-nonsense expression who walked through the house with a tablet, photographing everything, marking items with little numbered stickers like it was a crime scene. My mother tried to talk to her, probably attempted the same emotional manipulation she'd used on everyone else, but the deputy just shook her head and kept working, professional and impassive. By noon, every piece of furniture I'd purchased was documented and legally protected, which meant my family had to actually confront how little they owned, how much of their comfortable life had been subsidized by the daughter they dismissed as selfish. The moving truck sat in the driveway half empty, a monument to their poverty and my generosity. At 2 p.m., a conversion van pulled up and Kyle's mother emerged. A woman I'd met exactly twice, both times unpleasant experiences where she'd made it clear she thought Ebony had married down by choosing her son. She took one look at the situation, at the dark house and the half-empty truck and Ebony crying on the porch with the twins, and I saw her have what looked like a come-to-Jesus moment with Kyle. The conversation was animated, full of pointing and arm-waving, and it ended with Kyle loading his few belongings into his mother's van and driving away, leaving Ebony standing in the driveway watching him abandon her for the second time in 2 weeks. My sister stood there for a long moment, twins on her hips, staring at the empty street where her husband's van had disappeared, and even through the security camera I could see the moment she broke. The moment she realized that the lifestyle influencer persona was dead, that the brand was bankrupt, that she was a single mother with no job, no money, no prospects, and nowhere to live in 24 hours. She walked back into the dark house, gathered her children, and I watched her pack their belongings with a mechanical efficiency that suggested shock rather than acceptance. Just going through the motions because what else could she do? My parents spent day 2 making phone calls. I couldn't hear the conversations, but I could see the body language. My father hunched over his phone in the backyard, probably calling every friend from church begging for a place to stay. My mother in the kitchen sobbing between calls, probably reaching out to relatives they hadn't spoken to in years, trying to activate family connections they'd never maintained. By evening, they'd made some kind of arrangement because my father's truck was loaded with their belongings, packed so full the suspension was sagging, and they were making multiple trips to some destination off-camera. They weren't taking the furniture because they couldn't. The sheriff's inventory had made it untouchable, but they were taking everything else. Kitchen appliances I'd bought, dishes I'd purchased, towels and linens from closets I'd stocked. I made another call to Marcus. "They're taking items that weren't on the furniture inventory," I said. "Kitchen stuff, linens, small appliances. Technically I bought all of that too. Should I stop them? Is it worth it?" Marcus asked pragmatically. "You're talking about what, maybe $2,000 in household goods, versus the satisfaction of watching them loaded into a truck and drive away with the knowledge that they're taking these items to some apartment they can barely afford. Somewhere cramped and sad where every dish and towel will remind them of the house they lost. Sometimes, Zara, you have to let people take the small things so they can fully experience losing the big thing." He was right and I knew it. Let them take the dishes. Let them take the towels. Let them pack up the detritus of their life in my house and haul it to wherever they'd managed to find shelter. Every item they carried would be a reminder. Every fork and spoon would whisper, "Zara bought this." Every fitted sheet would be a memory of comfort they'd taken for granted. Day 3, the final day, the deadline day, started at dawn. I watched on camera as my family made their final trips, loading the last boxes, doing final sweeps of rooms looking for anything they'd missed. Ebony's boxes of fake designer goods were stacked in the rental truck like a monument to delusion. 2 years' worth of counterfeit luxury that wouldn't pay for a single month's rent in whatever low-income apartment she'd managed to qualify for. By 10 a.m., the house was mostly empty of their belongings, and they stood in the driveway having what looked like an intense family meeting, probably debating whether to leave early and preserve dignity, or stay until the last possible moment out of spite. My mother kept looking at the house, and I could see even through the grainy camera feed that she was crying again, mourning the loss of something she'd never actually owned but had convinced herself was hers through sheer force of entitlement. At 11:45, 15 minutes before the deadline, they made their decision. My father walked to the front door, pulled out his keys, the keys to my house, and I watched him stand there for a long moment holding them. He looked at the keys, looked at the door, looked back at my mother sitting in the truck, and I saw something in his posture that might have been grief or might have been the final acknowledgement of consequences he'd spent 65 years avoiding. He opened the mail slot and dropped the keys through it. I heard them hit the hardwood floor on my laptop speaker. A metallic clatter that sounded like finality, like the closing of a chapter, like the end of something that had been dying for 5 years but was only now officially dead. They got in their vehicles. My father in his overloaded truck, my mother beside him, Ebony in the rental truck with the twins strapped in car seats, her face blank and shocked, and they drove away. I watched them disappear down the street, turn the corner, vanish from the camera's field of view, and I waited for some feeling to hit me. Guilt, sadness, regret, relief, something. What I felt was nothing. Not emptiness, but the absence of feeling that comes when something that should hurt doesn't, when you've been bracing for emotional impact that never arrives. They were gone. The house was empty. The utilities were off. And I was sitting in a luxury hotel room drinking coffee that cost $12 and feeling nothing at all. At noon exactly, a sheriff's vehicle pulled up. Not the deputy who'd done the inventory, but a different officer, a man in his 40s with the build of someone who'd removed many families from many houses and had developed the necessary emotional calluses for the job. He walked to the door, tried the handle, found it locked, and then did something I didn't expect. He picked up the keys from inside the mail slot using a tool through the slot, unlocked the door, and did a full walkthrough with his body camera recording. He was documenting that the house was vacant, that the eviction order had been complied with, that there would be no question later about whether proper procedure had been followed. He spent 20 minutes inside, checking every room, every closet, every space where someone might try to hide and claim they'd never left. When he emerged, he placed a bright orange sticker on the front door that read, "Evicted. And no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted," in bold letters that the entire neighborhood could see. He got back in his vehicle and drove away. And the house sat there in the noon sun, empty and silent, and officially mine in every legal sense that mattered. I closed my laptop, set down my coffee, and looked around my hotel suite, my temporary sanctuary that had served its purpose but was no longer necessary. It was time to go home. Not to visit, not to inspect, not to survey damage. My house, my property, my space that was finally, completely, legally and practically mine. I packed my bags with the same efficiency I'd used when I'd fled 3 weeks ago, loaded my car, checked out of the Ritz with thanks to the staff who'd made my exile comfortable, and drove toward the suburbs. The house looked different as I pulled into the driveway. Smaller somehow, less imposing, just a structure of wood and brick that had no power over me anymore. I used my keys, the original keys I'd kept, the ones that had always been mine because the house had always been mine. And I opened the front door to the smell of stale air and the silence of abandonment. They'd done a terrible job cleaning. There were stains on the carpet from the twins' accidents, grease marks on the kitchen walls from Ebony's cooking experiments, a broken blind in the living room that Kyle had damaged during one of his DJ sessions. The damage deposit I'd never collected would have barely covered the repairs, but I didn't care because I was going to gut this place anyway, renovate it, make it into something that had never been touched by their chaos. I walked through each room, and it was like touring a museum of my own exploitation. Here was the office where they'd broken the door. Here was the kitchen where they'd criticized my cooking. Here was the living room where Kyle had done his spiritual performances. Every space held a memory of disrespect, but they were just memories now. Ghosts that couldn't hurt me because the people who'd created them were gone. In the master bedroom, my mother had left something. A framed photo of the family from 5 years ago, before the foreclosure, before the refinancing, when we'd still been pretending we were functional. We were all smiling in the picture. My father looking proud in his church clothes, my mother beaming beside him, Ebony young and hopeful before Kyle had destroyed her life, and me in the back, slightly out of focus, already fading even then. She'd left it on the dresser, accidentally or on purpose I couldn't tell, and I picked it up, looked at these people who shared my DNA but not my values, and I felt something finally. Not love, not hate, but a distant kind of pity for people who'd had everything they needed and had destroyed it through greed and entitlement and the inability to recognize a gift when it was subsidizing their entire existence. I walked downstairs, threw the photo in the trash without ceremony, and called a restoration company. "I need a full house cleaning, carpet replacement, wall repair and fumigation," I told the scheduler. "And I need it started tomorrow. I don't care what it costs. I want this place completely restored to the condition it was in before it was occupied by people who didn't respect it." "We can do that," the woman said cheerfully. "Sounds like you just evicted some problem tenants." "Something like that," I said, looking around the empty house that was already starting to feel like mine again. "Something exactly like that. I spent that first night alone in the house, sleeping on an air mattress in my office because all the furniture was either gone or contaminated by association, and it was the best sleep I'd had in 5 years. No bass thumping from downstairs. No twins crying through the walls. No mother's voice lecturing me about obligations. Just silence, clean and pure and finally mine. The eviction was complete. The family was gone. And somewhere in Atlanta, in apartments and shelters and places I'd never see, they were learning what it cost to lose the person who'd been holding them up while they'd been holding her down. I hoped it was expensive. I hoped it hurt. And I hoped that someday, maybe years from now, they'd understand that the cruelest thing they'd done wasn't demanding my money. It was forgetting I was human. 3 months after the eviction, I was standing in my completely renovated kitchen making coffee in a machine that cost more than my parents' monthly income when my phone buzzed with a notification from a number I didn't recognize. It was a text message, short and desperate. "Zara, it's Ebony. Please don't delete this. I need to talk to you. It's important. Not about money, I swear. Please." I stared at the message for a long moment, my finger hovering over the delete button, remembering every boundary violation, every entitled demand, every moment she treated me like a resource instead of a sister. But curiosity won out over caution and I typed back, "You have 5 minutes. Say what you need to say." The response came immediately, like she'd been waiting with her phone in her hand, desperately hoping I'd respond. "Kyle's gone. Like really gone. He emptied our bank account and moved to California with some woman he met online. I'm living in a 2-bedroom apartment in College Park with Mom and Dad and the twins. I'm working double shifts at a diner. Dad's working security at a mall. Mom's working retail. We're drowning, Zara. I'm not asking for money. I know you'll say no, but I need advice. How do you make it work? How do you survive when you have nothing?" I read the message twice, processing the information like data points in a fraud case. Kyle abandoned her. They're all living together in a small apartment. They're all working. They're struggling. 3 months ago, this would have felt like victory, like justice, like the cosmic scales finally balancing. Now it just felt tired, like watching people learn lessons they should have learned decades ago but had been too entitled to absorb until reality forced education upon them. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked through my renovated house. New floors, new paint, new furniture that I'd carefully selected without anyone else's input or criticism. The office had a reinforced door with a lock that could withstand a battering ram. The living room had a white sectional sofa that would never see fake designer boxes stacked against it. The kitchen had appliances that had never cooked a meal I'd be criticized for. It was perfect. It was peaceful. It was mine. I sat down on my new sofa and typed a response. "You survive by making a budget and sticking to it. You survive by not buying things you can't afford. You survive by working hard and not expecting anyone to rescue you. You survive by respecting boundaries, saving money, and understanding that your choices have consequences. Basically, you survive by doing everything I tried to teach you by example for 5 years while you were too busy playing influencer to notice." I sent it, then added, "And Ebony, you're not drowning. You're swimming. For the first time in your life, you're actually swimming instead of floating on someone else's back. It's supposed to feel hard. That's how you know it's real work." 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing, and I watched them pulse for almost a minute before her response came through. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, and I know you probably don't believe me, but I'm sorry for how we treated you. I didn't understand what you were doing for us because I'd never had to do it for myself. Kyle said you were selfish, and I believed him because it was easier than admitting I was selfish. Mom and Dad said you were cold, and I agreed because it meant I didn't have to acknowledge that you were just protecting yourself. I was wrong. We were all wrong. And I'm paying for it now in ways I didn't know were possible." I felt something crack in my chest. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the faint possibility of understanding, the recognition that sometimes people do learn, just not on the timeline you'd prefer. "What happened to Kyle?" I asked because I was curious despite myself. "He got involved with some crypto scheme," she typed back. "Met a woman in a Discord server who convinced him she was a millionaire investor. He emptied our account, which wasn't much, maybe $800, and flew to Los Angeles to close a deal with her. The deal was fake. The woman was fake. He's living in his car somewhere in Venice Beach, last I heard, trying to become a street performer. He hasn't called in 6 weeks. I filed for divorce 2 days ago. I almost laughed at the cosmic justice of it. Kyle, the spiritual guru, the manifestation expert, the man who'd claimed to channel abundance, was now homeless in California chasing another delusion while the family he'd abandoned worked minimum wage jobs to survive. And Mom and Dad. Yes. Dad's pride is destroyed, Ebony wrote. He works overnight security at a mall, sits in a booth watching cameras, and comes home every morning looking like he's aged 10 years. He doesn't talk much anymore. Mom works at Target retail floor, and she cries every time a church friend comes through her checkout line because she's humiliated. They're both broken, Zara. They know what they lost, and they know it's their fault, and it's killing them slowly. Part of me, the part that had slept in her car, that had watched them steal her belongings, that had been called selfish for setting boundaries, felt satisfied by this information, felt the warm glow of consequences finally landing on people who'd spent decades avoiding them. But another part of me, a part one didn't entirely recognize, felt something closer to sadness. Not for them but for the waste of it all, for the years that could have been different if they'd just chosen differently. How are the twins? I asked because they were innocent in this, victims of adults who'd prioritized ego over stability. They're okay, Ebony responded. They share a room with me. They don't have many toys because I can't afford them, but they're fed, they're clean, they're loved. I'm learning how to actually be a mother instead of a content creator who happened to have children. Hard, Zara. It's so much harder than I thought it would be. How did you do everything you did and make it look easy? It wasn't easy, I typed. It was exhausting. I just didn't complain because complaining to you would have resulted in more demands, not more help. That's the difference. I solved problems while you created them. A long pause then. Can I ask you something, and will you answer honestly? Depends on the question, I replied, feeling my defenses rise automatically. Do you hate us? Ebony wrote. Do you lie awake at night glad we're suffering? 'Cause I would understand if you did. I would hate me too if I were you. I thought about the question seriously, examining my feelings with the same analytical precision I applied to financial fraud cases, looking for the truth beneath the noise of emotion and expectation. No, I finally typed. I don't hate you. Hate requires caring enough to sustain anger. And honestly, I'm just tired. I'm tired of being angry, tired of being hurt, tired of being the family ATM and emotional punching bag. What I feel is relief. Relief that I'm not responsible for your choices anymore. Relief that your problems aren't mine to solve. Relief that I can finally live my life without constantly calculating the cost of your presence in it. Another pause, longer this time, and when her response came it was just 2 words. I understand. I set my phone down and looked around my living room, at the life I'd built in 3 months of freedom. The promotion that had made me the youngest head of financial investigations in my company's history. The relationship with Julian that had deepened into something that felt like partnership instead of parasitism. The peace that came from knowing that every dollar I earned was mine to spend or save or invest without guilt about who I wasn't supporting. My phone buzzed again. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I know I never said it before because I was too jealous and too selfish, but I'm proud of you for building a career, for buying this house, for having the strength to walk away from us when we gave you no choice. You deserved better than what we gave you, and I'm sorry we couldn't be the family you needed. I stared at that message for a long time and I felt the tiniest crack in the wall I'd built around my heart, not enough to let them back in, but enough to acknowledge that maybe, eventually, years from now, there might be some kind of relationship that wasn't built on exploitation and resentment. Thank you for saying that, I typed back. And Ebony, you're going to be okay. You're doing the work now. The real work, not the performative Instagram work. You're learning how to stand on your own feet instead of standing on someone else's shoulders. It sucks, and it's hard, and it's supposed to be because that's what growth costs. But you'll survive it, and you might even become someone you can respect. Will you ever forgive us? She asked. I don't know, I answered honestly. Forgiveness isn't something I owe you, and it's not something you can earn by suffering enough. Maybe someday I'll wake up and the anger will be gone and there'll be room for something else. Or maybe not. Either way, my healing isn't about you anymore. It's about me, and that's the lesson you really need to learn. Your happiness can't depend on my forgiveness. You have to forgive yourself and move forward whether I ever do or not. I understand, she typed again, and then, can I text you sometimes? Not often, not asking for things, just to let you know we're still here, still trying. I thought about it, weighed the risk of re-engagement against the possibility that people actually could change, that family didn't have to be a source of trauma, that maybe boundaries could be maintained without total excommunication. Once a month, I typed. You can send me an update once a month. I'll read it, and I might respond or I might not. But if you ask for money, if you try to manipulate, if you cross any boundary I set, I block you permanently. Deal. Deal, she responded immediately. Thank you, Zara, for everything. For saving us 5 years ago, for setting us free 3 months ago, and for not completely closing the door today. I set my phone down and walked to the window, looking out at my neighborhood, at the houses full of families who were hopefully healthier than mine had been, at the world that kept spinning regardless of individual dramas and personal reckonings. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Julian standing there with takeout bags and a smile that made my renovated house feel like a home. Hey, he said, kissing me briefly. Brought Thai food and a documentary about financial fraud in the pharmaceutical industry. Figured it's your dream date night. You know me too well, I said, pulling him inside. And as we settled on the couch with pad thai and spring rolls, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from Marcus. Just got confirmation that your parents made their first payment toward the legal fees. It's only $200 of the $12,000 they owe. But it's something. Wage garnishment works slowly but effectively. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled, showed the text to Julian, and we clinked our wine glasses together in a toast to consequences, to boundaries, to the beautiful finality of legal judgments that don't care about tears or excuses or appeals to family loyalty. 3 months ago, I'd stood in a courtroom and listened to a judge tell my family they had 72 hours to vacate my property. Today, I was sitting in that property with a man who respected me, eating food I'd paid for without resentment, living a life that was entirely, completely, legally and emotionally mine. The Bank of Zara had closed its doors, changed its locks, and opened under new management. Management that understood the difference between generosity and exploitation, between love and obligation, between family and people who just happen to share your DNA. And somewhere across Atlanta, in a small apartment in College Park, my family was learning the same lesson I'd learned years ago but had been too afraid to act on until they'd forced my hand. That the most expensive thing in life isn't rent or food or utilities. It's the cost of losing someone who would have given you everything if you just treated them like they were worth something. I hope they were learning. I hope they were growing. I hope that someday, maybe years from now, we could have some kind of relationship built on mutual respect instead of one-sided exploitation. But if we didn't, if they never learned, never changed, never became people I could safely love, that was okay too. Because I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm, and the people who expect you to aren't family. They're arsonists. And arsonists don't deserve access to matches. No matter how many times they promise they've changed, no matter how much they cry about the cold, no matter how loudly they claim that this time will be different. The house was quiet. The wine was good. The company was better. And for the first time in 29 years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, wasn't calculating the cost of someone else's existence, wasn't sacrificing my peace for someone else's comfort. I was just living. Finally, beautifully, expensively living. And it turned out that freedom, like everything else worth having, had a price. The price was everything I'd already paid, and it was worth every single cent. Then, remember, family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences they've spent years earning. If you've ever had to choose between your peace and someone else's comfort, drop your story in the comments. And if you're currently funding someone else's delusion while they call you selfish, this is your sign. Document everything. Set boundaries. Protect yourself. Because the people who truly love you would never force you to choose between your well-being and their demands. Hit subscribe for more stories where consequences finally catch up, where boundaries are respected, and where being the villain means finally choosing yourself.